person.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Growing with Fishes podcast. This week we have a very special guest. Dr. James Rakocy is with us. He has some internet connection issues, so we're going to just immediately cut to him rather than doing introductions like we normally do. And thanks a lot, Dr. Rakocy, for joining us.
Dr. James Rakocy is with us. He has some internet connection issues, so we're going to just immediately cut to him rather than doing introductions like we normally do.
There we go. I do apologize about the loop there. I forgot to mute that screen. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Rakocy. I just want to introduce you. So Dr. Rakocy is one of the original people that helped found what we all currently understand as commercial aquaponics, or any kind of aquaponics, and has done helped found a lot of the research that has then got us all to where we're currently able to do aquaponics on the commercial and home scale. So thanks a lot for joining us. I've been trying to get you on for quite a long time, and I really appreciate you joining us. And some of our panelists are also having some issues connecting as well. Marty and Charlie are both having issues connecting right now, so they will be joining us shortly. And thanks again, Dr. Rakocy, for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you do, and then I have a bunch of questions I'd like to ask you.
Okay, well, let me just give you a little bit of a history. I got my PhD in aquaculture in 1980, and then I got a job at the University of the Virgin Islands. And one of my assignments was to develop aquaponics, and I was there for 30 years doing that. And then I retired in 2010, and for the last 7 years I've been living in Thailand, and I have a consulting firm called the Aquaponic Doctors. So that's the quick version.
Awesome. So why don't you give us a little bit of a background about how you got started, and then I'd love for at some point for you to bring up some of the, the fact that you were telling me about today about how some people died originally in the beginning about how when they were cleaning their systems, and that was really eye-opening to me when we got a chance to talk earlier. But
that was not aquaponics. That was not aquaponics. That was recirculating systems.
Oh, okay.
And,
okay.
Yeah, so I don't want to give people the idea that you'll die if you do aquaponics.
Oh, not at all. It was just eye-opening to me about how the early days they didn't quite understand all that was going on. And
well, yeah, this is if you ever have a very deep tank with sludge in the bottom of it, don't get yourself lowered into the bottom of that, because it could all be methane or carbon dioxide. So just be careful of that, and you'll die. You'll just drop dead.
So why don't you tell us about the early days and how you got started with aquaponics? You're one of the founders, so I'm very curious to hear about that.
Well, the real early days, it started off with my childhood interest in fishing in Wisconsin and raising aquarium fish. I had 17 aquariums, and I raised fish and sold them to aquarium stores. And I did gardening, in the ground. And then fast forward, I got my bachelor's degree at the University of Wisconsin, and that was in 1967. After that, I went to Sierra Leone in the Peace Corps for 2 years. I lived in West Africa for 2 years. Saw a lot of starvation, a lot of hunger there. The babies had distended stomachs, indicating protein deficiencies. Got interested in food production, and when I got back, I'm skipping some episodes here, but I got a master's degree at the University of North Carolina in environmental biology. I didn't even know the word aquaculture at that time. The aquaculture was just a new word at that time, and I liked the idea of raising fish because I was always interested in fish. So I subscribed to Aquaculture magazine, saw a picture at Auburn University of a bunch of foreign students lifting up a net for tilapia, and I said, that's what I want to do. And so I applied for my PhD at Auburn University, and I graduated in 1980. And while I was there, my research was a sort of a precursor to an aquaponic system. I raised tilapia very intensively in tanks, and I had a lot of different stages for filtration, and I was mainly relying on aquatic plants. But among the aquatic plants such as water hyacinth and duckweed, I also raised water chestnut and watercress. I also raised submerged plants too, Elodia and Vallisneria, and I sold those to aquarium stores too. I always like to sell things when I get done raising them. And so that when I graduated, there was an opening at the University of the Virgin Islands, and there was my predecessor had built a little aquaponics system next to the university. His name was Barnaby Wadden, and he had some good results. It was just a rough system, a preliminary system, but it worked. He produced fish and he produced tomatoes. And then that interested the director at the experiment station, and he wanted to, Barnaby Wadden and his supervisor wanted to pursue aquaponics, and they started ordering tanks, but by the time the tanks came, they both left, and then I got the job, and I stayed for 30 years, and we started a long process of trial and error to finally get a commercial scale developed, probably about 19 years into my tenure there. I'll just pause here for a second and see if there's any questions.
That's the first I've ever heard about the beginning. I'd love for you to continue.
Okay, well, let me get into the research part of it. Our first system that we set up, well, we didn't even have a research facility. We had to build a shed. We had to put in tanks and electric lines, water lines, air lines. The very first system we set up as a demonstration consisted of 3.5 oil barrels. And these are not the plastic oil barrels, these are metal oil barrels. And we knew somebody who was could do welding, and he was interested in the concept. So one oil barrel represented the fish tank, and then he made a cone at the bottom of another oil barrel. And then we took one oil barrel and he cut it in half, and we used 2/3 of each half. We filled them with gravel, and it was a flood and drain system. And then the water went from there to a sump and got pumped back up to the fish tank. And then our first trial with that, it was 4.5 month trial, and we raised 100 pounds of food in 3.5 oil barrels. We raised about 30 pounds of tilapia, 64 pounds of tomatoes, and 8 pounds of lettuce. And we kept that same design. That's the UVI system, the University of the Virgin Islands system. We kept that same design, and we scaled it up to where we had one fish tank that was 3,000 gallons, and we had 2 hydroponic tanks that each were 20 feet long by 4 feet wide. And again, we used gravel, and it was a flood and drain. And we went through a lot of mistakes. I don't want to spend all the time on the podcast talking about all the mistakes, but we didn't know the right ratios for the fish to the plants. We didn't know the right pipe sizes. We didn't know that a clarifier doesn't take out all the solids. It only took out the big settable solids. About half the solids passed through and clogged the gravel. And so we made a lot of adjustments, and we got some good results. We learned we learned not to use gravel, basically, because gravel, for a commercial system, gravel is just too heavy, takes too much of an infrastructure, and it's difficult to plant in gravel. There's always the danger of clogging. We got over the danger of clogging by putting in a false bottom, and we suspended the gravel about 3 inches over the bottom of the tank. Then when we did that, we had accumulation of solids in that false bottom, and we solved that problem by putting tilapia in there and letting them swim up and down, and they stirred up the solids, so the solids moved down through the system and were taken out by the clarifier. And we eventually came around to the point where gravel was not good for commercial aquaponics, and we switched over to polystyrene. We had the system that I'm describing. We had 6 replicated systems, so we could do controlled experiments where we had 2 treatments replicated 3 times. Then based on that, we scaled it up to 100-foot long hydroponic tanks by 4 foot wide. We had 2 of those, in one fish tank. We also had a smaller fish tank, and we had what we set up was two systems. One we call high tech, and one we call low tech. The high tech had the clarifier, and it had a biofilter, and it had a sump. And the low tech didn't have any clarification. We just left the solids in there. We quickly learned that you can't leave the solids in when you have a deep water culture, because the solids collect on the bottom of the tank. On a hot day with all that decomposition gas, the solids will rise up into the plant roots and suffocate the plants. They won't be able to get oxygen, and they would wilt down. So we eliminated the low tech. And then we had this biofilter in there, and we had a rotating biological contactors, and we wanted to see if we really needed these biofilters, because we had two tanks that were 4 feet wide and 100 foot long. So that's 800 square feet of growing area, and so we took out the two. We had stages, supports for these rotating biological contactors. We took the rotating contactors out. We just let the water run through those two empty stages, and then we noticed that we had a lot more solids settling out. So we realized at that point that we needed a second stage besides clarification, and that's where we then came up with well, it wasn't our original idea. Somebody else was using orchard netting, but orchard netting has got a lot of great characteristics. But anyway, we started feeding more and more food to the fish tank, and we found out we had tremendous biofiltration capacity in the growing beds, and we didn't need to have a biofilter. The growing beds could be the biofilter in a deep water culture system. And but the big issue then became, if you have only one fish tank, in the beginning when you have fingerlings, you don't have enough nutrients. At the end, you have probably more than enough. So you might have toxicity develop. So then we decided to build our first commercial system where we had 4 fish tanks. The fish were staggered. The total growth period was 24 weeks, but we would harvest one tank every 6 weeks. And then we upped the number of growing beds to 6 growing beds that were 100 feet long by 4 feet wide. We had like 3 sets of 2 growing beds. The water would flow out, and come out one growing bed and come back the other growing bed and come to a sump and get pumped up to the fish tanks. The design was really good because it eliminated the amount of piping you needed. The water, it was mainly what we call open channel flow. Water flowed out through the growing bed, and then it came back through another growing bed, and we had very minimal piping. And the sump was right next to the fish tank, so there was very minimal pumping, and there was very little friction loss when you were pumping. And there was only one pump. We pumped up to the fish tanks, and the water flowed by gravity through the whole system until it came back down to the sump. We
do it in South Africa. I mean, is that where you developed that? Because that's how I learned from my friend who taught me hydroponic nutrients to make my mix in my hydroponic greenhouse. That's what they did, 4 by 100 foot beds.
That's in South Africa. When was that?
Oh shoot, probably 20 years. He did all South Africa and Kenya, because as you probably know, over there the government tells you what to grow and they give you the seed and then you grow it if you have a farm. And he would go around and he'd set up everybody's farm, and they had, I mean, I saw a picture. I can't find them. I'm really bummed out, but I had pictures where you can't see the end of the farm, and they're just under posts and shade cloths with 4 by 100 foot beds that drop 1 1/8 inches, and then it has a sump at the bottom, pumps it right back up. Or like you said, you can stagger it where it pumps up and gravity's back to the, but they were kind of, plain going down a hill, most of them like that.
Well, I was just in South Africa. I gave a workshop in South Africa, and nobody told me about that. In fact, aquaponics seemed to be very new to the people in South Africa. I'm sorry.
It was hydroponics. I thought I made that clear. No, I was just saying they were using a 4 by 100 grow bed system like you're describing.
Oh, we're not.
I'm not. What they do in Africa. That's what sold me on becoming a hydroponic farmer, because I said if they can do it in South Africa, we should be able to do it in South Carolina.
Actually, a guy named Merle Jensen from University of Arizona was the first person I saw doing that. So I don't claim that we discovered that either. I think the guy probably, Merle Jensen was probably, I don't know if he developed it or if he got it from somebody before him, but he was one of the earliest hydroponics researchers, and he would have been there more than 20 years ago. He set up a lot of systems in the Middle East too. And
see, that's pretty cool because it does. The Middle East goes in fact, I can tell you the guy that taught me, his name is David Hill. And he now works for Canna International, but he used to be the state representative for South Africa and Kenya. Then he worked with a company in California in retail he hated and ran. They did have a hydroponic lettuce farm, which drove all the hydro stores. But he now has gotten out of retail, and last I heard he was working for Canna Nutrients, and that's where he's at now. That's who taught me, and I'm going to shut up now. I just wanted to bring that up because it sounds the same, except for the aquaponics, but they're doing that now over there too.
Yeah, but you know something? When you go from hydroponics, to aquaponics, that's a big change. I mean, those systems don't operate the same at all. For example, in a hydroponic system, the pH is always going up. You have to put acid in there. In an aquaponic system, the pH is always going down. You have to put base in there. So just something like that. And the other thing about aquaponics is that you've got to worry about what you're going to do with the solids. The solids are a big issue. You need to remove the solids before you get to the plants. Otherwise, they'll clog the plant roots and cause anaerobic zones. But as I was talking with Stephen this afternoon, the solids are very, very important because most of the phosphorus is in the solids. And so another aspect, we didn't do this. Okay, let me resume the UVI story just briefly. Once we got the 4 fish tanks and the 6 hydroponic tanks, we could produce about 10 or 11,000 pounds of tilapia a year. These tanks were 10 feet in diameter, and I can't remember how much lettuce we could produce, but we produced a lot of lettuce, and we produced many crops. And then what we did is, well, we had an early commercial scale system, then we upgraded that to to a better commercial scale system, and then even when we had the better one, we did a lot of refinement on that. We did a lot of changes. One of our issues was heat, so we did a lot of things to reduce the heat of the water and with shading, for example, and trying to dissipate heat from the airlines and so forth. And anyway, this happened. We got this final commercial scale system up about 19 years into my being there. And then we started offering training programs. I think in 1999 we started a training program. That was actually, the internet wasn't really very big at that point, so we didn't get too many people coming. But I think we had about 17 people the first year we offered it, and later on, and we only had a limited size classroom. Later on, they made a conference room, and one year we had 92 people take our short course. Altogether, we had 566 people from 55 countries and 45 states and U.S. territories come down to the Virgin Islands to take our short course. It's still going on. Don Bailey is the person that's still there, and he's still offering the course, and he's still getting maxing out on the number of enrollees. He only can accept 20 people, but he offers the course multiple times during the year. So the original system is down there. We call it the UVI system, and I think it's pretty. I've given so many talks. I think I've trained over 1,000 people, and I think that it's basically the design. It's the basis of the design of aquaponic systems today. But I think there's a lot more advances. I mean, but this was basically telling you, the design indicated that we needed to take out the solids, that we needed to aerate a lot. We aerated underneath the plants to keep the oxygen levels up in the roots, and we aerated a lot in the fish tanks, and we also did ratio studies so that we knew what the right ratio was, and that was probably a big breakthrough, because in the beginning we had way too much fish for the plants, and we got into toxic levels of nutrients over 2,000 milligrams per liter. near the end there, we had a ratio. We figured out the ratio is not has nothing to do with the fish. It has to do with the amount of fish feed that you put in there. So the size of the fish or the number of fish that you have is not important from the standpoint of producing nutrients for the plants. You need to have in the range of 60 to 100 grams of fish feed per square meter plant growing area per day. Now, what's important for the fish is that when you stock these tanks, that within 24 weeks they can be up to a marketable size. So the stocking density is important from that aspect. But the main thing is that we had these 6 tanks that had staggered the fish production so that the nutrients going into the system were relatively constant, and we staggered the plant production so the nutrient uptake was relatively constant. So we had a very consistent environment. And one thing we did is we had some pretty high densities, but we weren't actually. One thing we learned is not to try to stress the fish and not to go beyond what's safe for the fish. So we don't want to. The key point of these systems is not set a world record for densities or production levels, but to not stress anything so that it comes down with the disease. And well, we learned a lot of things. I'm trying to summarize. I'm trying to summarize 30 years of work in a few minutes. One thing we learned. One thing. Let me tell you one thing that Wilson Leonard, my business partner, found out about aquaponics is that it was surprising. Our system was outdoors in the open, and it was we're in the tropics where there's no cold season to kill insects. And well, Charlie, are you out there? He's not online. Well,
Charlie isn't joining us yet, unfortunately. Hopefully, he'll be joining us before the end of the episode here.
Okay, Charlie was in charge of the biological control of the pest on the plant, so he could speak to this better than me. But we didn't really have too much pest pressures being out in the open. And what Wilson Leonard learned from a project that he did in New Zealand, they hired him to compare hydroponics with aquaponics. So he set up a standard hydroponic system that the industry in New Zealand uses to raise lettuce right next to an aquaponic system. It was a nutrient film technique method, and the plant trays were right next to each other. One being fed with inorganic chemicals, and the other one getting most of its nutrients from the fish. In his case, he was raising grass carp, and he put a big yellow strip, like about 8 inches wide, down the whole length of these NFT troughs. There was like one strip for the aquaponics, one strip for the hydroponics. And when he looked at, and these yellow strips are sticky, and they capture insects. When you looked at the yellow strip above the aquaponics, very few insects were on it. When you looked at the yellow strip above the hydroponics, it was almost black with insects. And he was using the standard method that they use in New Zealand. So that indicates that for some reason, the aquaponic plants can resist pests. And the main reason is that they're healthy. They're healthier. And a plant that's stressed, like apparently those hydroponic plants were stressed, when a plant is stressed, it creates more sugar, and that attracts insects. So you don't necessarily have to have an insect problem if you have a really healthy plant. And I run across this so many times, even in the tropics, people immediately want to put up a greenhouse. And actually, greenhouses will cause more problems. If you have the correct temperature outside, greenhouses will cause more problems than they're worth, because once an insect gets in the greenhouse, there's no natural predators out there to control it, and it'll run wild in the greenhouse. And then you got to be ordering all these biological control insects like parasitic wasps and so forth. I've seen people, I won't name any names, but that you have a perfect climate for raising plants outside, and they go to work and put a greenhouse over it. A greenhouse is only for climates that are not perfect, so that you can use the greenhouse in the winter to create an ideal environment, or if it's too hot in the summer, to chill it and create an ideal environment. But if you got good temperature regime outside, you don't need a greenhouse. So that maybe that Anybody want to discuss that?
All right, I can say that here it's seasonal. The greenhouse shuts down in June, and then you start up and you have production starting in October. Like you said, in the South, they use greenhouses to get through the winter and provide food when the conventional methods won't be available. And then everybody shuts down by the end of May and beginning of June. They shut down for 2 or 3 months, clean the whole thing out, and get ready for the fall. And the
okay, that's hydroponics. But you know something? That's when you have a rigid greenhouse. There's a lot of times in the South, if you're, it depends on your degrees latitude and what the annual temperature regimen is. But you can put a cold frame. You can put a greenhouse frame over your growing beds, and when it starts getting cold in the fall, you just simply cover it with a clear plastic membrane, and the greenhouse effect will warm the plants sufficiently that you can still keep going with the plants all winter long. Now this is not good for the northern latitudes because that's way too cold outside. But in northern Florida or in Texas or Louisiana or something like that, you can simply. I saw this in Oklahoma actually. You probably don't even. I don't even know if they're in business. It's called Inslee Farm, but he was raising chives, and he had his greenhouse covered in the winter in Oklahoma, near Oklahoma City, and with just a clear plastic membrane. And then when the spring came, he took the membrane off and just raised all his crops outside. So these membranes are relatively cheap. So you have half a year greenhouse and half a year no greenhouse. When you start getting into really cold climates, then you need the rigid greenhouses and all the environmental control that goes along with that.
I like that idea. I've had success that way, being open and then being closed on 2 different times of the year. And you're right. You can it'll grow like crazy. Just because you have a floor, like a greenhouse floor in a system, the plants go nuts without the plastic on there.
When I was in Jamaica, we did just thrip screening. We had cold frames the same way that you would for hoop houses, and we just threw the thrip screening on it, not to hold any heat or anything like that, but just to keep the bugs off, so I didn't have to use IPM and as little IPM as possible. And that's all we did was curtains of thrip screening, and that's all we did because that's all we had to do. I didn't have to account for climate control, just like you're saying.
Was it? Were you at altitude?
We were at about 20, a little over 2,000 feet, 2,200, 2,400, something like that.
Yeah, that insect screen is, if you're at sea level, it can get quite hot in there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if you're, I always tell people in tropics. In fact, I just had an inquiry. Last week from Saudi Arabia where I didn't know this, but there's mountain ranges in Saudi Arabia where you have ideal growing temperatures year round. The only trouble is the mountains are about 600 kilometers from the population center, so selling the crop is a little problematic.
And they have enough money to move in. It's okay. Well, they'll build a hyper train or something, I'm sure.
These guys, not everybody in Saudi Arabia is rich.
Oh, I know.
In fact, the sheikhs got shook down, so they're not so rich anymore either.
So you did a lot of work on a lot of early research on the exact numbers and ppm levels that you needed to achieve for aquaponics. Do you want to talk a little bit about why it is that aquaponics can achieve the same numbers of tissue mineralization density as hydroponics does, but at the same time why it is that hydroponics takes much higher nutrient levels in the soil versus aquaponics, which we can use in most cases a quarter to half the numbers or even less to achieve those same nutrient density numbers in the tissue.
I loved it. Charlie posted was like 4% or something like that, wasn't it? It was, I don't remember. I know Charlie posted one recently. It was a very low percentage, like especially of like potassium. It was significantly lower for increased growth or even the same growth. It was really interesting. I think he even talked about it last time he was on, didn't he, Steve?
Yep.
Is that two root zone?
Well, we basically a hydroponic solution starts off at about 2,000 milligrams per liter, and then it's nothing but uptake. So that's all the nutrient levels are always going down. They're not going down. You can start with an ideal balance, but as the nutrients go down, it gets a little bit out of whack, and the balance will eventually become imbalanced, basically. In an aquaponic system, you have, because the nutrients are being generated every day, you don't have to be at that 2,000 milligrams per liter level. Actually, we ran our system sometimes at 200 milligrams per liter, one-tenth. But I think probably being around 1/4, 25% of the would be okay. So because you have nutrients generated every day, you have nutrients generated. You know, I don't know if anybody knows the exact all the pathways through which these nutrients are generated. I'm sure fish give off some nutrients in dissolved form. A lot of them probably come from solids that are quickly broken down by bacteria or mineralized. And Wilson Leonard, he's got a different design. Wilson, if you're not familiar with Dr. Leonard, he has he came on the scene after me, so he decided to go. Our system, we have like an excess of nutrients, and we discharge about 5% of the system water on a weekly basis. But Dr. Leonard, what he did is he tried to set up a system where he didn't discharge any water or any solids. And what he has is he's got mineral. He puts when he takes the solids out, he puts all that water with the solids in it into another tank where he aerates it continuously. And over about a month period of time, all those solids mineralize and turn into the solids dissipate, and the minerals are left. And then when he comes into work in the morning, he turns off the aeration, and while he's doing his chores, all the solids settle to the bottom of the tank, and then he thinks, let's say you're going to add 10 gallons of solids to that tank every day. Well, in the morning he'll decant 10 gallons of clear mineralized water, and he'll pour it back into his aquaponic system. So he never discharges any solids, and he never discharges any water except for the water lost through evaporation. So his system is probably the most closed system there is. What he does is he uses lower levels of fish production, and he does a little bit more supplementing. But he wrote an article in World Aquaculture magazine a couple of years back. I forget what the title is, but the gist of it is that if you're going to do aquaponics, you should be using virtually all the nutrients you can from the fish that come from the fish, and that's roughly about 80% of the nutrients for your plants should come from the fish. You have to supplement with potassium and calcium and a little bit of iron. But what some people do, and I'm not going to name any names, but they go to work and they basically have systems that it's almost a hydroponic system. They don't use very much. They've undersized their fish so much relative to the plants, or the feeding rate ratio is so low that they have practically a hydroponic system, and maybe they're only using 20% of the nutrients coming from the fish. And we would not consider that an appropriate aquaponic system. I've come across systems in Germany that what they do is a decoupled system, and they use a microscreen drum filter to get rid of their solids, and they lose 7% of the system water every single day. So after about 13 days, it's a complete water exchange. And then they go to work and they they decouple it, so the water coming from the fish goes into this big tank, and then they adjust the nutrient levels in the big tank, and they go on a one pass through the hydroponics system. It's basically what it is basically a recirculating fish culture system next to a hydroponic system, but they call it aquaponics, and it's a little bit deceptive. And also, you can tell if people are doing that by looking at the clarity of the water. If the water is tea stained, then you know it's an aquaponic system, because that's tannic acid that's built up in the water. If it's crystal clear, it isn't aquaponics. it's hydroponics being passed off as aquaponics. And let me tell you the reason why. The reason why is that 20 or so years ago, hydroponics was really popular, and it's basically become, nothing new. It's old, now it's an old hat, but aquaponics is a hot issue. So if you have a short course, you offer courses, you can make more money off of the courses than you can raising the crops. And so they advertise their systems as aquaponic systems, and they advertise the course as an aquaponic course, but it's really hydroponics disguised as aquaponics. And this is one of the things that bothers us. that's why Wilson Leonard wrote that article.
Would you say that Decoupled falls into that? What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm as someone that grows arguably some of the highest feeding nutrient level crops of anyone that's doing aquaponics, which is cannabis and fruit trees in terms of nutrient uptake per day. I can do that on a single loop without decoupling. The only reason why I can see decoupling is if you're going to do cold water fish. If I'm going to do salmon or Arctic char, yes, it makes sense to me to do a different temperature or if I want to do spirulina, yeah, it makes a difference to put a separate pH level for my decoupled. But anything beyond those kind of things, it doesn't, to me, I can get the same level of achievement with less input and better results than even they can with a decouple in terms of yield. And I've proven that by the fact that every single major aquaponic cannabis company is doing single loop right now. So, and they're talking, the largest hydroponic or aquaponic production facility currently under construction is in Canada right now, and it's over 1 million square feet, and it's an aquaponic cannabis grow. Okay, and they're doing single loop. It's the biggest facility anywhere in North America right now. It's Aquilitas, I think, is the name of the company. So no one's doing decoupled on that scale. Everyone's moving to single loop because it's less input. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, what do you mean by single loop? That's a new term for me.
So having the plants and the fish in the same system, whereas decoupled, where the plants are in a separate system.
Okay, single loop, we would refer to that as a recirculating system. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, let me tell you that I'm not that experienced with the decoupled system because I never worked with the decoupled system. And but the key point, I mean, yes, I agree that there are some issues. Like for example, I mean, it could be nutrient issues that you're not getting. That you need to have a separate nutrient. You have to be supplementing with something that could be toxic to the fish. Like for example, if you say the cold water fish, they can't handle potassium very well, and they can't handle nitrates very well. So in those cases, you might want to just use the system. You might want to divert some of the system water to that system, to the plants, and have another loop within the plants. I'm not really that experienced with how to do that, but I'm sure there are applications. But the main question is, are you utilizing all the plant nutrients, all the fish nutrients that you can, or are you discharging a lot of them? So what's the answer?
So we actually do a combination of both vermicompost, since we do all of our stuff with both soil layer and an aquaponic layer. We talked a little bit about that on the phone today. Just quick disclosure, me and Dr. Rakosi got to speak for the first time today on the phone, and we ended up having an incredible conversation. And I got to introduce him to the dual root zone stuff that we've been working with and a bunch of other things. I'll save you guys the details. But with dual root zone, we do take a portion of our production. Basically, the first pull off of our filters is the thickest, heaviest, sludgiest stuff. We take that and we feed it to our vermicompost, which is our worms, and we use that for our soil layer. We then take our second and third pulls, we put that into our remineralization tanks, which is a little bit more liquidy and a little bit more fluid, and tends to work a little bit better for that application. And we remineralize that the same way that you're familiar with, I guess, with the UVI model. So it's kind of a hybridization.
Well, I was talking about Wilson's model. The UVI model is a little different than that. The UVI model is, we have a clarifier which removes, we remove about 50% of the solids through settling. And these are the settlable solids, the heavy solids. And then suspended solids, the finer solids, are removed in this orchard netting or bird netting tank. Let me just, the solids, even though we have in our systems, we've had clarifiers with 60-degree slopes at the bottom of it, conical bottoms. After about 2 or 3 days, the solids won't settle out anymore because you get all this biological growth or biofouling on the sides of the tanks, and the solids just stick to it, and then they'll start decomposing and form big mats of solids that'll float to the surface. So to circumvent that, we put about 20 male tilapia fingerlings in the clarifier, and they are not fed, and they scrape the sides of the tanks, and that dislodges the solids, which settle to the bottom of the cone, and you remove the solids like 3 times a day by just opening a valve. So in a sewage treatment plant, they have automatic scraper bars to get over this problem, and we use tilapia as our scraper bars to get the solids to settle out there. You have to be careful, though, that they don't get too big, because then they become counterproductive, because if they get big, they stir up a lot of solids too. So after about 12 weeks, we always use male fingerlings, and after 12 weeks, we'll take them out and put another batch of smaller fingerlings in them. The orchard netting, the bird netting tank, it looks probably kind of unattractive, but so many interesting things happen in this tank, because the way we're removing solids there, we have these very thin black plastic mesh on the. We have like 3/4 inch mesh orchard. If anybody doesn't know what bird netting and orchard netting is, what they do is it's a netting that they put over fruit trees as the fruits become ripe, and that keeps the birds from eating the fruit. So it's used in the orchard industry. Anyway, we bunch it up in this tank, and the solids will come out. The suspended solids will come out not by settling, but by the process of interception. Like the solids hits the plastic and then sticks to it, and absorption. Once it sticks to it, another solid hits it, and it gloms onto that, and all of a sudden you see like a crystal going on these black plastic threads. Because the threads are so thin, it's very easy to wash these things off, and so we have to clean these tanks once or twice a week, and we dump all the water when we're doing it. But our system is such that we need to dump about 5% of the water, because once we decided we weren't going to dump that 5%, and we were just instead of dumping the tank, we're going to put a little pump in there, and we're going to just draw those tanks down and reuse the water. And after doing that for about 2 or 3 months, we had the most horrible case of biofouling all over the system. Even 4-inch pipes or 3-inch pipes practically clogged up. I mean, the growth on the sides of these pipes constricted the pipes, and the water backed up and overflowed the fish tanks, and we needed to be removing some of the dissolved organic matter from the system. But let me tell you, the 4 things that happen in our orchard netting tanks, or we call them filter tanks. We first of all are removing the fine suspended solids. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is that if you allow those solids to accumulate and you only clean it once a week, some anaerobic zones develop inside the solids, and they will remove excess nitrate, which is important if you're raising a fruiting crop. So the frequency at which you remove solids can regulate the nitrate levels in the system. Another thing they're doing is they're mineralizing the solid. The bacteria in there we take the solids out, but in the period of a week or half a week, we get partial mineralization. Not like Dr. Leonard does, where he gets complete mineralization. We get partial, but that's important because it's providing a lot of trace nutrients for the plants, this partial mineralization. And
can you describe the difference between partial and full mineralization? Because that's definitely a term that a lot of our listeners are not familiar with.
Well, I mean, at the end of a week, there's still a lot of solids there, right? So we haven't broken down all the solids. So we're discharging some of the solids. Some of the solids, though, have been decomposed, and the nutrients have been released. When decomposition occurs, the end product is carbon dioxide gas and water vapor. And then if there was a mineral in this organic compound that's now released as an ion that can be absorbed by the plant. Okay, so that's, I mean, that's what we would call that partial mineralization. We don't break down all the solids, just, you know, but it is important to break down some of the solids. Okay, and then the final thing that it does, and this is something that most people, well, we learned the hard way. When we one time we decided, well, why are we worrying about putting in this clarifier and this filter tank? It's a lot of tanks, it's a lot of expense, it's difficult. It's not difficult, but it's a little bit time consuming to clean the filter tanks. It only takes about an hour to clean them in one system. But we put a microscreen drum filter in there, and a microscreen drum filter, when you look at the effluent from a microscreen drum filter, you don't see one speck of solids in it. It's perfectly clear water. So we eliminated all the clarifiers and the filter tanks, and we put the microscreen drum filters there. And then what happened is that we weren't removing the dissolved organic matter. You can't see it. Like if you put a teaspoon of sugar in a glass of water and stir it up, you won't see the sugar, but that glass of water is full of dissolved organic matter. And the same thing applies with an aquaponic system. Well, what happened is that's food for bacteria. So what happened is that as the water flowed down the growing beds, bacteria grew on the roots of the plants and formed this gelatinous growth, which absorbed this dissolved organic matter. So for the first out of 100 feet, about the first 50 feet the roots were covered with this gelatinous material, which slowed down the uptake of nutrients and oxygen and also affected the plant growth. So, but with this filter tank, for some reason, we have our filter tanks. It's 2 filter tanks that are 6 feet long by 2.5 feet wide, and we have the water runs down one, and for the sake of space, then it goes to the next tank and it comes back again, and so that's 12 feet of length. And by the end of the 12 feet, there's no solids in it at a flow rate of 50 gallons a minute. And and during that time that it's in there, there's bacteria attached again to this orchard netting that's absorbing the dissolved organic matter. So by the time the water flows through this 12 feet, there's no more dissolved organic matter and there's no gelatinous growth on the plant roots. Now, if you don't use the filter tank, you would then need to install a biofilter after the clarifier and in the biofilter, if you've ever seen a biofilter where the water is flowing down the length of the biofilter, like say a rotating biological contactor, the first part of it will be heterotrophic bacteria that eat the organic matter, and they're absorbing this dissolved organic matter, and then you get the bacteria that take up the ammonia and the nitrite. So, but the filter tank does that. So the filter tank is doing 4 things: taking out suspended solids. It's you could get denitrification to get your high levels of nitrates down. You can mineralize to get trace nutrients produced for your plants, and you can get your dissolved organic matter out of the water. Are you still there?
Yes.
Yep.
Is everybody shocked? Anyway, that's the crux of the system. That's the crux of the system, and that tank, it looks kind of messy. You see all the solids there, and a lot of people don't want to clean it out. It's really easy to clean. We just open a drain and we wrap up we have a special thing to roll up the orchard netting, and high pressure water spray takes all the solids off real easily. You know, they used to have these corrugated plastic media. I forget what they call them, but and that does
K1. What's it called?
No. You're talking about the moving bed biofouling. Before, they used to have slanted corrugated media in a big block of plastic, and you stack them up. You created a trickling filter usually, or some people did it in a submerged form.
Like a wet dry. Like the bio balls.
No. This is one solid block of stuff with like a honeycomb and there's little channels that the water flows through. It's at an angle. And so instead of having to settle 2 feet, it only has to settle about half an inch to stick onto the plastic. It's a plastic sheets. This is sheeting, and it's all together. I can't think of the name because I haven't even referred to this in 25 years. But the trouble with that is that there was one flat sheet of plastic, and you can't get the solids. The solid sticks so hard to it. It's very hard to clean. Charlie had experience with this at Virginia State University. He had his first job in aquaculture there. I should say that Charlie worked with me for 13 years in the Virgin Islands. He worked a long time down there, and he's a good worker. Really happy to see him doing his work at Santa Fe College.
He said he'll be joining us here shortly. I just talked to him a couple minutes ago.
I might be running out of my data.
Oh, sure.
Gigabytes. So if I all of a sudden you don't hear from me.
That might be him. Someone just joined us here. Richard just joined us. I'm not sure who that is.
Okay.
But
so anyway, get back to the decoupled. I'm not that familiar with it, and I can see that there's going to be applications for it, where maybe you have to keep 2 nutrient regimes or 2 temperature regimes or something like that. But the key point of it should be that you're using as much of the nutrients supplied by the fish as possible.
Speaking of the devil, there's Charlie.
Yeah, I think I'm online.
You are. Hi, Charlie.
Hey, Jim. Hey, I've been listening for a while. You guys are having a great show.
Okay. You got to tell us
what's up, Charlie.
Tell me what you're up to.
I've got a little echo on this line. I'm going to drop and try to reconnect.
It's on Dr. Rakosi's end, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So just don't talk quite as loud. It should work.
Oh, okay. Am I talking too loud?
Oh, no, not you. It just your microphone's close to your speaker. So he just has to not be quite so loud when he talks. That's all.
Oh, okay. Whatever.
Yeah, I was catching that last part about these settlers. Jim, if I remember, it was like a vertical tube settler.
Yeah, vertical tube. Yeah. And you had the experience with that, right? And you can vouch for the fact that they're not very good, right?
Yeah, it takes a lot of water. Blue Ridge Aquaculture had those, and it took a powerful force to clean those settlers off.
Yeah. Is there anything new? Is there anything new out there for getting solids off these days?
Well, a lot of the guests here are using the radial flow settler, I think, instead of the settling clarifier.
We actually use a combination of radial flow and then microbials. Like we talked a little bit about lactobacilli. Actually, big thanks to Marty for being one of the first people to figure that out, along with the guys over at Kentucky State. Both of you guys around the same time discovered that. And Marty, do you want to talk a little about that, how you got started? Are you still there?
Yeah. So basically, we were using, I was making labs as a part of which is a Lactobacillus serum, and so I was experimenting with that, and I had put some of it in my worm bin, like the leftovers and stuff like that, and I just sort of poured it on top, and also on top with some filter paper from my aquaponic system, and I came back like 2 days later, and it had like eaten it clean. I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. And so I started adding some pretty regularly to my aquaponic systems and like checking the beds and finding, not just it breaking down a lot more of the solids to the point where, because I run low density systems, I don't have to remove solids nearly as often from, or even just loose material, like you're saying, the organic material, it needs to get removed like from my media beds. I just have to do it a lot less often, like, whereas I probably have to do it, like once every, say few weeks in some of my systems. I'm doing it more like once every 6 months. So, but I add labs or Bokashi brand. Some I'm adding lactobacillus probably about once a week. And then obviously through the red worm bin, I use that in the dual root zone. I would assume the population's pretty well established throughout that soil layer as well. So just keeping it a healthy population of the system. I haven't had any anaerobic issues in any of my media beds, any of the bottom of the dual root zone pots. I haven't had any like root rot, like even on like the cover crop and stuff that I use, or like anything. Everything just has extremely healthy white roots, and that's just been a drastic difference from before. Whereas without that, it would develop over time. You would get anaerobic areas in the media bed specifically that would have to get cleaned out, even with a siphon system and different things going. Like it seemed like eventually you would have little spots where it would go anaerobic and it would like smell different, and you would get unhealthy root systems or root rot or different things like that. And ever since then, I haven't had any issues with it at all. So been doing a lot of ferments with it as well. So like supplementing with fermented fruit extracts or plant extracts. So using lactobacillus in a ferment to extract essentially minerals or nutrients to be able to add them into the system in liquid form. And then I'll feed, like, let's say one of the ones I do a lot is the sour plum that grows out here in front. We don't, nothing really eats it. They just sort of fall on the ground, and normally they just go to waste. So I have my kids gather up a bunch of them into a bucket, and we do a big ferment with like some bokashi brand, and let it break down over about a week or so, and then seal it up and be able to use it as supplement in the aquaponic systems. And all the solids go to the worm bin, and they really love to eat that up, and really increases the population a lot in the worm bin. I've noticed too is a lot. Anytime I put in the solids from one of those probiotic ferments, the population just goes crazy. So I've really seen a lot of benefit from incorporating it on multiple levels in the garden.
I have a question. Is why would you have, once you inoculate a system, wouldn't the because there's a lot of organic matter there, wouldn't the lactobacillus population remain relatively constant as long as they had food?
Yeah, they would. The only thing that the reason that I continue to add it is that I feel like it, even though it can exist in aerobic zones, it reproduces better in anaerobic zones. So I want it to sort of be constantly searching out any places that might be anaerobic and dominating them until they're gone, and then their population would drop back down. But I do think that there is a constant sort of baseline in my system. Even at this point, if I stopped adding it, it would probably still be there, especially since I added to my red worm bin as well. Like, I definitely think that now that I have a healthy baseline, I could probably drop off and maybe not do it as much as I do. But I bought a $20 bag of it like 2 years ago, so I use it pretty sparingly when I do it, just because it really doesn't take much. The population explodes pretty quick after you start that rehydration process.
What's the name of the product that you buy? Is there a special name to it, or is it just lactobacillus?
I use a bokashi brand. It's a rice bokashi brand from EM1. It's EM1 bokashi brand, and then the company is Terragenics, is who makes it.
How do you spell bokashi?
Bokashi is BOKASHI. And that's essentially a rice bran with a powdered molasses, some powder that gives you like your macronutrients, and I think there's one other thing in there too, but there's only like 40 ingredients to it. But it's essentially rice bran that's been inoculated with lactobacillus, and then some powdered molasses that is just food for it to take off with.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Jim, this is Charlie.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience with microbial inoculation, like separate to mineralized fish waste or shrimp waste? I've seen some biofloc systems that are using inoculums to reduce that waste load.
We did an experiment once. Remember when Kelly was there and
Yeah.
Clinton? We did it. We got a small business innovation research grant to test out these a range of these bacteria in our system. I think we had to replicate it, so maybe it was only 3, but I can't remember what they were. But they're commercial products that are used in soil applications, and we tested 3. I'm sure. I haven't thought of this in so many years. I can't remember what they were, but what the result was there was no result. But probably because we didn't know how to apply it, or we didn't apply enough of it, or something. Because we had big systems; those replicated systems are fairly big. We might not have put enough of it in. But this lactobacillus is a good idea.
Yeah, you can make you can ferment your own lactobacillus just from raw milk, relatively easily as well. So the brand that you get will provide you a few other macronutrients than if you just made labs yourself. But it's really easy to do. You can basically start with a rice wash, and you let it soak, and then you can most people use like an airtight seal to be able to do it, but it only takes about 2 weeks or so, and you can harvest your own lactobacillus and be able to add that to your system as well.
Well, that sounds good. That's an advance. That's a nice advance.
Yeah. Well, not only that, I wanted to chime in real quick, and this is something that I sent to Charlie, and I told Dr. Rakosi about it, but I haven't sent him the article yet. But in 2016 and again in 2017, they proved that lactobacilli also reduces it eliminates E. coli, salmonella, and a whole bunch of other negative foodborne pathogens, specifically not only through when it's watered in by the root system, but also when it's used strictly as a cleaning agent over alcohol or other typical cleaning agents on your food processing areas. So it has a lot of promise for the food, even people doing vegetables, not even doing cannabis or anything else, as far as something that could actually give us an edge over some of these ever-evolving foodborne pathogens.
Okay, that's another good thing here. Yeah, send that article. I'd be interested in seeing the article.
Sure.
I have a question for Charlie. Charlie, what's the status on what's the organic situation?
What came out as of January basically said that as of now and as of really the inception of the whole rules, aquaponic systems can be certified organics. So there's been no change. If you do things still by the rules and you set your organic systems plan properly and you find the right agency, you still can certify your crops as organic. No change. I don't believe cannabis, because it's not federally legal, I don't think there's any organic standard for cannabis. Is that right, Steve?
Correct. Now, Canada is working towards getting a organic standard for Canada, but that's the only current nation that I'm currently aware of. I know Croatia I've heard rumors that Croatia, because they're one of the only EU countries, they're also working on an organic standard, or at least their nation is. Again, neither one of these are close to being finished, but again, all these states, now California has an equivalency one that they're kind of working on right now that they don't have implemented yet that would be similar. Or Oregon. Marty, do you want to speak a little bit on Oregon's? I know you know that one.
On Oregon's what?
Organic cannabis standard or equivalent.
They have one. I can't remember. It's like Clean Green, I think it is, something
Clean
like
Green, that's it. I couldn't remember. So California also has Clean Green, which is functionally really similar, but because it's federally tied, you have to use a different name for it because the feds won't touch cannabis yet. Now, give them a year or two, and hopefully the feds will come around. There's I just posted an article for those of you who are interested on the Aquaponic Cannabis Facebook group that has the latest article about the federal government sending out a survey to a bunch of people and asking them what they think needs to be involved in the regulations, which is a step in the right direction. It means they're working on it. It means someone got hired to actually look into that. So this is good news for all of us. It doesn't mean anything's solved, but it means they're working on it. So
thanks, Steve.
Yep.
I also wanted to say, as we started talking about solids breakdown and the way we used to manage them and at UVI and the way maybe trends are heading these days, I do want to remind everybody that's listening that that UVI system was a very heavily stocked system. And I think that system alone was getting somewhere between 30 and 40 pounds of fish feed every day. So it's much different than many of our listeners are used to dealing with. And when you're putting that much fish feed in the system, it's a huge amount of solids that must be addressed.
Can you talk about say that system versus Ken's system, which you've had a chance to see and you've taught at that facility and everything? Do you want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the design differences and maybe some of the how the UVI system has evolved to become even better than and then originally was, or maybe not even that design, but how that's, you know, the original design has evolved from where it's first began, because you two guys together helped form that. So I'd love to ask the two of you that question.
And Charlie can, I don't know who Ken is.
Yeah, let me start with he's just talking maybe the evolution, and Ken Armstrong from Ouroboros is a farm we were at recently. But I would say that the main reason people started evolving the system, and I would probably put Nick Savadov up there at the top of the list, is because we were in an outdoor environment. So when you move indoors, you've got to maximize the production in that space. So I think that's what drove almost all of the decisions to change the design a little bit. And then the second would be the solid waste management. So trying to keep it in on farm because of permitting, for instance, you know, discharging from your facility is really going to ban a lot of aquaculture facilities from even getting off the ground in the US. So looking towards zero discharge systems. And then also the value of that sludge. People start to realize there's a lot of money. If you look at all the UVI economic analysis of these systems, we never included the value of the sludge that was being discharged. We gave that away at UVI, and we did some soil fertility trials. We started doing some trials with dewatering that solid waste, but we really didn't do a lot to mineralize it and put it back in the system, as Jim said. But I think those are some of the trends that made other growers start evolving the system. And as Jim said, you know, he looks forward to seeing people advance these systems. And there are obviously advances to be made. And I think most of us here, we're involved in teaching in some aspect. And I try to inspire the new generation now to take what we've learned. We can catch you up pretty quick. And now take it to advanced stages, and let's see where we can go with it. Go ahead.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about specifically about how in regards to his design, we're incorporating 30 to 35% of the system volume being media beds in corporation with the same level of volume of DWC that you guys had, and how that affected the water chemistry, because he's down to 5 to 10 grams of food per square meter, and you guys were at 40 or 50, correct?
60 to 100.
60 to 100.
So he's significantly lower, and I'd love to. You've actually seen the system in person. I'd love to hear you speak on that.
Yeah, I think one thing that can drive that ratio down is he's feeding trout, so he's feeding a higher protein fish feed than we were. We were in the 30 to 32% range. So anytime you bump up your protein level, that's going to reduce that feeding rate ratio. And then you know, I think he leaves his nutrients in a bit to mineralize, and I didn't catch the whole process, but I believe he's also doing some offline mineralization and adding nutrients back to the system. Is that right, Ken? I mean, Steve?
Yes, he does do offline remineralization. So he's kind of doing a combination of offline remineralization along with the filtration that he has and the media beds.
So for all those reasons, you know, higher protein feed, putting the nutrients back into the system, that's the kind of stuff Wilson Leonard was showing. by a closed loop system, zero discharge. He also, I believe, lowered that ratio. Is that right, Jim?
Yeah, I think he's got a much lower ratio. Yeah, I mean, and he produces only about I think he only produces about 25% of the amount of fish we produce. So,
and I think that's the case with Ouroboros as well. I don't think they're geared up to the type of fish production that we had. I'd have to confirm that with Ken, but I don't think he's growing as much fish as the UVI system was.
Yeah, you guys have vastly different plant to fish ratios.
What Wilson's idea was is that you make most of your money off the plants. So why not skew it more towards the plants than?
Well, what I'd love to see is someone do a low nutrient system, say a lettuce system, and I teach this in my classes. Say a lettuce system, it doesn't require really high nutrient levels, or there's other crops that fall into that category, and then do a tropical fish breeding system, because if you did that, you could crank 10 times the amount from the fish than you ever could the plants, but no one's doing that.
You know, I calculated once with red swordtails that you could, you know, we could produce. I think our system we could produce. Well, this is an earlier stage. I calculated that we could produce like $48,000 from the fish side by raising red swordtails. So yeah, you can if you could flood the market back basically with one aquaponic system.
Yeah, and that's something I often tell people that go into the cannabis industry is, look, you want your temperature for your cannabis plants, for your aquaponic system for cannabis to be around 68 degrees. It gives you maximum nutrient availability and maximum oxygen availability. And tropical fish love 68 to 72. You'll get maximum growth speed out of those tropical fish, and you can raise plecos that go for, you know, a couple $100 after a year or two of growth. You can raise all kinds of tropicals, even guppies or plecos or guppies or platies, or even the high turnover stuff. You can get such a high rate for. You can get so much more money, and you have an aquaculture license or a pet trade license, depending on what category and what state you're in, which generally are $800 or less per year. Or I can get into the food trade and deal with a meat processing license and the headache of all that, or an aquaculture license, which in certain states can be more complicated than others, over a pet trade license. And it's less licensing, it's less inspections, it's less regulatory issues, and it allows me to turn a profit better, especially for cannabis people that already have to deal with a mountain and a small army just to get their cannabis license to begin with, dealing with a whole other second mountain and army to deal with that you have to then overcome just to get a license and deal with that whole separate regulation, not to mention the additional cost. A meat processing license, you're looking at $20,000 to $40,000 just to make sure that you have all your compliance, all of your regulatory stuff covered, and make all your paperwork filed properly between your whoever you file, consult with, and everything's done. It's a ballpark. It might be slightly over, but it's around there. Or I can get a pet trade license for $800 or $125, depending on your state, and immediately get going and not have to deal with any of the headache.
One thing you could raise that's quite practical is koi carp. Get small fry and then raise them up to a large size for decorative ornamental ponds. And they can take really cold temperatures. There's no temperature issue with them. One thing you have to worry about with guppies, though, and the live bearers, is that if they get out into your plant tanks, we did this in the beginning. We had a bloom of zooplankton in our tanks. We had ostracods and I can't remember the other thing we had, but we put in fish, ornamental fish. We put guppies in and swordtails in to control the zooplankton, and they did a good job of that. But the trouble is they reproduce so much, and then after they've consumed all the fish, all the food, there's no more food, so they're picking around on the plant roots, and they're causing incidental damage, and they're also opening up, they might be knocking off root hairs and so forth, and they might be opening up the plants to infection. In fact, before we did that, we never had any Pythium problems. When we brought in those ornamental fish, and they controlled the zooplankton blooms, but then after that we had Pythium for the rest of our careers there. So be careful about that. I recommend that you you could raise, if you're doing deep water culture, you should raise ornamental fish in those tanks, but do egg layers because they don't reproduce as much and they won't explode like guppies. We ordered 100 pair of guppies, and within no time at all, we had 100,000 guppies in those tanks, and they didn't have any food.
Yeah, I think also, go ahead.
We've had really good luck with the crystal shrimp and red cherry shrimp in the DWCs without them actually turning and feeding on the plants. They're pretty strict detrivores/algivores, and that's the only thing that we found. But again, when we tested with guppies and other live bears, we had similar results to what you had. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple comments. Steve and I taught a class recently, and Steve really brings a lot of that information to our classes about different options. So I think that really makes our classes valuable to have that. And I think that it's a great opportunity. I think we also have people who have different goals. So I personally got into this because I wanted to be a fish farmer to grow protein for humanity. So for a lot of reasons, we'll always have people who want to grow a food fish. And then my point there is I'm not sure of the volatility of the aquarium trade, but when the shit hits the fan, everybody still has to eat. I'm not sure if they're all going to eat guppies and mollies and platies or very expensive algae eaters even. So that's why I think that we're going to see mostly aquaponics sticking with the famous food fish that we see now.
I think the aquarium industry has, well, from when I was young, it's gone down considerably because everybody is looking at their iPhones now and computer screens. Right. Back then, you were looking at your fish tanks.
Yeah, I think so too.
You know, I walked just the other day. I don't know where was this. I was I flew in a couple days ago, and I walked by a store, and it looked like they had an incredible fish tank. And I just stopped and had a look again, and it actually was a computer that they had facing the storefront window. It really faked me out. I thought it was an aquarium.
I did see a interesting way to make money with these ornamental fish one time when I visited Jim in Thailand. Went to a big market, Chatuchak market, and there's probably, it must be an acre of animal trading going on. And on the back wall there was a big rowdy crowd back there for some reason. Of course, I had to go see what was the rowdy crowd. And I looked back and there was dozens of fish tanks with the beta fish, the Siamese fighting fish. And sure enough, they had guys throwing money betting on which fish was going to fight to the death. I don't know if that's legal in the US, but we could push the limits. There's probably no law against fighting fish on the books.
Yeah, right. So Aquaponic Association is going to start a new.
No, I'm just kidding.
Ponics.
One of the East-West competition.
Yeah.
American Aquaponics.
Yeah, we could have different. We could do a championship for each state, and then they go on to nationals.
Awesome.
Now, I'm trying to say Charlie said about the feeding the fish, because that's kind of how I look at it. I'm setting up for being able to feed myself and the community more. I mean, that's why I'm kind of into it, because I found out that with growing food, I grow so much food. I got food that gets wasted now. We're doing all these, the composting and stuff like that, for different projects. Yeah, I'm more about, I'd love to feed the community, and I see that, but I also see Steve's point. Yeah, you can actually have a viable business, to if you can set up the infrastructure first, to build to sell fish to the fish trade. But I'm with Charlie where I want to grow food to eat. Yeah, so that's what I was saying.
As long as you realize sometimes it's more, you'll provide far more food for people if you just grow the little fish and then buy the meat and then give them that. Sometimes
you create a job,
But that's only if you have someone to sell it to, right?
Oh, but yeah, I know. I'm with Charlie though to grow food fish when we can, but just it's something that I feel is a huge untapped market in aquaponics specifically, that it has a lot of potential that no one's really going after.
And I think
where you actually could have clientele. If you're in the country, that's probably not going to work too well. But if you're in a big city, yeah, I think then you can target as long as you can get into any kind of pet stores. I mean, that's the whole thing, getting into the fish stores.
Or even just wholesalers. You can always mail them across the country. You can get a wholesaler license for $300 in the United States. So
Let me give you an example. This is not with aquaponics. This is with a recirculating system, and this is when I first got to Virgin Islands in the early 1980s. I went to a conference in Los Angeles, and there's a fellow who's my age now. His name was Dallas Weaver, and he had a PhD in civil engineering, and he set up in his garage these fluidized sand filters, and he raised huge numbers of feeder guppies, and he was selling, and he was strategically located in Los Angeles, where the feeder guppies had to come in from either Florida or Singapore or Hong Kong, but he was right there. And you know, a lot of doctors' offices and stuff have these fancy Oscars and other attractive fish, and so there's a big demand for feeder guppies, you know, to feed these fish with guppies. And I think he was making something like close to $50 a pound for his feeder guppies. And in his garage back then, he said that he was grossing $250,000 a year. But he was unique because he had incredible densities, and he had these incredible fluidized sand filters, and he knew how to design all this because he was a civil engineer. But he was strategically located, and he could get incredible price on a pound basis for these guppies.
Wow.
Well, there's
That's
another,
cool.
maybe think of another target market would be your bait and tackle shops that are everywhere. You know.
Yep. The other thing too, I used to raise live betas and discus actually, and get pretty ludicrous profit margins on both of those. I was getting $250 a piece for fry that were a little over an inch long for betas.
Wow.
At one point for some of the exotic varieties. So, you know, you can get, you know, really ludicrous margins depending on how you set up your aquaponic system. And again, fish producing nitrogen, as long as they can tolerate the nitrate levels that you're at, and they're happy and are going to be healthy, doesn't matter what species. You can have thousands of guppies, or you can have tilapia or trout, you know, they're produced the same.
Yeah, something to consider.
Now, some of the research that we did a bunch of is herbivorous fish versus carnivorous fish, and how that translates into nutrient output. And we found that the carnivorous fish with the higher protein input, like Charlie was mentioning earlier, have much more nitrogen output, whereas the herbivorous fish have much more phosphorus output and tend to be better for flowering crop systems.
That's interesting.
Yep.
I had a couple of more comments on the aquarium fish. Is you know, often in aquaculture, if there's a fish that's a high value fish, it's a reason why they're hard to culture. Whether it's a breeding life cycle that we haven't broken or very hard to do in captivity, or you have to culture live feeds because they're not going to take onto pelleted diet. So now you're culturing other animals to culture this animal. And then obviously, you guys, if anybody's looking to do this, you want a hardy fish that can take the high stocking rates that Jim was talking about. I had a friend recently looking to do a very high value cichlid, and we brought 8 of them in and kept them for half a year or so. And as I started looking into it, to get a breeding pair, we needed an animal that was about 3 to 5 years old, and the breeding pair needed about 500 gallons for 2 fish. So a lot of considerations getting into aquarium fish.
Good point.
Yep. They can definitely be far trickier than the normal fish to breed, but again, that's where the profit margins come in.
That's right.
Are there any new species of fish that are going commercial besides our standard trout and tilapia?
I keep my eye on that saw guy, that walleye cross. Jim's from Wisconsin, and it's probably the most popular fish up there. A lot of people talk about walleye and perch, but I think we're going to have to do more work with the hybrids to get better disease resistance, I guess, faster growth rates. So I would be interested in looking at the saw guy. And then now we're seeing barramundi is kind of spreading across the U.S. and into Canada now too.
Personally, we've had a lot of great luck with pacu. I think pacu is a really big untapped fish as far as ludicrous growth rate and really good meat.
And there's, I think, 2 out of 3 local farms here are raising catfish as their aquaponics fish.
Catfish never did well in recirculating systems, though, because they're quite prone to disease if you're using a channel catfish. If you use something like a walking catfish, like a clarius, they're much hardier.
I'm pretty sure they're channel catfish or bullhead catfish. I don't remember one of the two. I don't remember.
Quick note on that, we've noticed as well the lactobacilli made a night and day difference with the catfish, even when we netted them and transferred them between tanks, which often you guys know will kill a couple of your catfish every time. We didn't have the deaths.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that there's 3 of them here locally in the valley that I've been to, and 2 of them run some kind of catfish, but I didn't ask them to specify. But I would say, you know, it's either bullhead or channel cat.
Yeah, it's probably channel catfish. And I do see people occasionally will have success. They'll have these fish in there that they don't touch for years. You got a big catfish in your tank. But I'm with Jim. I usually recommend not to do catfish because they're not adaptable to tank culture. And sure enough, I would say 3/4 at least of the people that I tell don't do catfish, they do it and then they come down with disease issues.
You know, if you're starting off and you're new to aquaponics, your best bet is to go with tilapia. That's the most the hardiest fish, the most tolerant fish. And if you want to later on go to barramundi or some other species, then learn it with tilapia first.
And not outrageous breeding, you know, tank needs or anything like that. Like relatively easy to breed.
Well, you know, tilapia is easy to breed, but if you're it doesn't, there's hatcheries in the United States that you can buy sex reversed male fingerlings, and there's kind of a rule of thumb in the commercial industry that if you're producing like 100 to 200 tons of tilapia a year, you're better off buying the fingerlings. If you're producing like 400 tons, then you can look into a breeding program. But it takes too much time to, if you're doing a grow out operation, it takes too much time to do all the procedures for breeding. So I would not even consider breeding. I would just buy them. You know, there's a few very reputable hatcheries, and ask Charlie offline which ones those are, and I would go that way.
I was speaking more to the Charlie shit hit the fan scenario. It's another one of those that you can breed a lot of it, and you know, it's a good protein fish.
Yeah, I also think a lot of people online listening to this program, they again probably starting small, running small systems. And I see a lot of people with a couple aquariums over on the side with a male and maybe 2 or 3 females. And that's a fine way to get yourself a free number of fry. But as Jim and I usually teach commercial systems, as he's talking 100 tons of fish, these are big facilities. So once you go up into commercial, I would agree to take yourself out of the breeding program, unless you're getting some income on selling fingerlings and fry, which is another good market. There's a lot of people want to get into aquaponics, so why not be that small tilapia supplier? Most of my commercial suppliers, they only want to sell me 3,000 fish at a time minimum. So all those things to consider.
Yeah, you also, tilapia is not legal in some states. So like here in Oregon, for instance, you have to go through a pretty rigorous permitting process just to be able to have them here. When I asked about it at the county, you know, it was I didn't have a lot. They didn't have a lot of information on it, other than they knew that I had to get some kind of permit, and it was, I don't know, it just seemed like it was kind of a runaround as opposed to some of the other ones. And ultimately, for me, like, since my primary interest was growing medicine, you know, I just ended up going to the pet store and getting some koi and some goldfish, and you know, that's just pretty much what I've done. I did do some, what was it? A couple of were trout that we had for a little while outdoors, and we raised them for about 10 months or so before it got really hot, and then harvested those, and it went relatively well. But again, that's all small home system stuff. You know, like Charlie was talking about, it's night and day difference. But I do think that a lot of people listening, like you're saying, are the small home grow, wanting to start a system, and if you're just starting out, we talk about this a lot. If you're just starting out, I highly recommend just going to the pet store, buying some goldfish, and getting your system established and learning some stuff. And if you're, just like anything else, if you're thinking about scaling up to commercial, then just take those steps that make sense and learn as you go. I definitely would would shy away from swinging for the fences in a situation like trying to farm fish, like Steve was talking about. Like he has extensive experience in the trade, so it's a little different for him to talk about, I think.
Oh, I love it. When I worked at Aquaponics stores, I had multiple people say, "Hey, I built a 12,000 square foot aquaponics system, and what's iron, and what's pH, and how do I fix it?" But they have 60,000, 70,000 gallons of system. No idea what either one of those things are. I've had that call happen to me 3 separate times.
Yeah, or I've received, an order of 500 tilapia, and now 400 of them are dead because, I've never raised anything,
System, I've got 500 tilapia, and now how do I build my system?
Yeah.
So on that call, let me ask this, Charlie and Dr. Rakosi, what are the craziest, at maybe top 3 or top 5? Hey, this is going on in my system. I think the other one that I can add is I've had 3 calls from Australia asking me what the level of uranium or radon is acceptable in their water, which is also an hysterical question.
I can throw out a couple and I'll let Jim have a couple minutes to think about it. I had a client one year having problems with their ammonia. And this may have been at a time Jim and I were in communication helping somebody. But the system seemed to work fine for a long time. Everything was running well. And when there's a water quality problem, I tell my students, you have to put on your detective cap. It's something that you're overlooking or you did wrong. You're feeding out of ratio. But again, the system had been running well. But this group was, I think we determined once that they were, when they were cleaning their rafts, they were bleaching their rafts, and you're bleaching both sides of the rafts, including the underside where all your biofilm was. So a simple, suggestion where, don't do that. Just scrub off the top of your raft lightly, get your raft right back on the water surface to preserve your bacteria. That saved that facility a lot of time and a lot of money. And then the other one I want to mention is a lot of people see opportunity in urban settings to get into a building, maybe a cheap lease. Maybe somebody's got something that they're given for $1 on a short-term lease, and so you can get in these facilities and build up. But if that lease isn't a long-term lease, that landlord has the right to pull that lease anytime they want. And I've seen a facility get up and established, start their marketing, teaching some courses, and then they got a 2-week notice to vacate their facility. So I always caution people about that and to take care of that lease. And I don't have a third one on top of my head, but I always caution everyone to make sure they understand that what their source of water is before they jump into this. If you're going big scale, you want quality and you want quantity. So, I've seen people buy property and then have their water analyzed and realize they can't use it for any kind of aquaculture. Those are a few things.
The other good one that I remember is I had someone ask me when I was working in the pet trade if they could legit pleasure themselves into a fish tank to feed newborn fry.
That's a good one.
With a straight, 100% serious, with a straight face, was not joking at all.
Oh, okay. I got a couple. One was actually not aquaponics. It was we had a biofloc system, and this was a woman on another island in the Caribbean, and we spent. We had a biofloc system that was a 200,000 gallon tank, and so anyway, she spent the money to build this tank. She ordered 4 big vertical lift aerators, and I took several trips to to visit the facility. And when it was done, she harvested fish after about 8 months, and they were really small. I said, "Why are they so small?" And I said, "Are you feeding them, this amount of feed every day?" And she said, "No." She said, "Feed is expensive. You don't know anything about business. I'm not feeding them hardly anything." I couldn't believe she had a PhD in accounting or something like that. Don't put any feed in there. It costs too much. Another one that's a sad story, and this is a really true story. This was in there was a social program in Philadelphia, and they had $1 million worth of funds to build a aquaponic system with basil, and they hired a consultant that was advertising online, and he wrote a big proposal and designed this system and everything like that. And there was a pretty thick proposal, and a lawyer sent it to me, and he said, "Can you review this for me?" And he said, and I said, but he didn't say anything about paying me to review it. Would have taken maybe half a day to sit down there and go over the system. And I called him and said, "Well, are you going to pay me?" He says, "No, we only have enough money in the budget for one consultant. That's the one we hired." I said, "Well, you can't go into a doctor's office and ask for 4 hours of time, or into a lawyer's office." And so I said, "If you can't pay me, I'm not going to review it." So I actually didn't even open the envelope. I sent it back, and I had to pay $3 for priority mail to send it back to the guy. They built the system, and it turns out that consultant didn't know a thing about aquaponics. And Don Bailey and I were working on a system at Rutgers University, and Don was up there by himself once, and we went over to view the finished system. And I asked Don, "Well, how was it?" He says, "Well, if they would bulldoze it down and start over again, maybe it would work." But this guy just had airlift pumps all over the place. He had a net separating the fish component from the plant component. A net, not a wall, not screens. Just a net. It was horrible, and they never actually. And then what they wound up doing? They blamed it on me because they said, "Well, we're supposed to review the proposal." So, anyway.
I remember both of those stories, Jim. I was there during those times. Another one that everybody here is going to make this mistake one time in their fish career, and I tell my students, and I do see it still, is that if you don't take both ends of your pump and your water hose out, you're going to get a back siphon after you leave your facility, and you'll empty tanks right onto the ground. We saw that before at UVI. I've seen it other times in my career. Yeah,
we had employees at Aquaponics source flood our lab, and then Leslie, our neighbor's unit. So thankfully, we could usually mitigate that with a bag of lettuce and basil, and usually staved off their anger.
Yeah, and I think most of your listeners, especially if they've stuck around this long tonight, have an understanding of aquaculture. But we all know that when we shift the pH up by adding our base additions, we're also shifting the ammonia into a more toxic phase. So I remember one time at UVI, we had a fingerling system. We probably had 50,000 fry and fingerlings in this system. And one of the technicians came in after a weekend where nobody had checked the pH or the ammonia levels. pH dropped rapidly. He added the base, the calcium hydroxide, and as it went into all 12 tanks, it instantly shifted that ammonia to the toxic form, and the fish just dived out, and we killed every fish within probably 5 minutes.
But before they die, they all jump out of the water. It's like they're electrocuted. Yeah, and that pH can go from 7 down to 4.5 in just a matter of a couple of days. So you really got to be on top of that.
That's right.
That's why I'm a big proponent of maintaining alkalinity and making sure you're testing alkalinity as well, because that helps prevent that sudden crash.
Well, you want your alkalinity to be in a solid form that can buffer the system, so that the pH
exactly
buffers. Yeah.
Yep. Steve, why don't you talk to Dr. Rakosi here? So Jim, again, people kind of take our advice. They've run it for years, and now I'm seeing some changes in the way people manage their systems. And Steve is kind of adamant that stop using KOH, and instead using more products that are designed more to increase the alkalinity, not just a sudden shift in pH. I would love to hear you guys talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So I actually read a bunch of organic studies on organic hydroponics and how in organic hydroponics, their main goal is 100% stability, maintaining it as stable as possible alkalinity and pH and not letting that shift, because that's what those microbes want in order to be maximum efficient for remineralization of whatever it is they're trying to remineralize. In our case, we're trying to remineralize fish waste. In some cases, they're using cow manure or human manure or chicken manure. It varies. Pig manure is very common right now. They're trying to do a lot of work with it because there's a lot of pig manure for food production. So if you take those things, and that's where this research came from, and they discovered that when alkalinity goes below, I believe it was 30 parts per million or 28 parts per million, somewhere in that range, it cuts bacterial replication in half. So if I'm using something that is like a KOH or a calcium hydroxide, I'm not getting that extra additional buffer. Yes, I have the hydrogen ions, which helps, and that will give its own buffer capacity to a lesser extent, but it's not the same as calcium, and it's not, or silica, for example. I'm a big proponent of potassium silicate because again, it provides a more stable pH change. I use both of these when I worked a lot with planted aquariums for the same reasons that we use them in aquaponics.
Well, are you talking about, again, having it in a solid form that's going to dissolve slowly and keep a steady pH?
Yes, so these are all powdered forms. I like to use potassium bicarbonate or calcium carbonate, or a really fine powdered dolomite will also work, or potassium silicate are the pH ups that I like the most. Potassium silicate and calcium carbonate being my go-tos.
Well, what we had, though, is we had a base edition tank. We know our system was 29,000 gallons or 110 cubic meters. And we had a base edition tank that slowly, we would add like 1,000 grams of either calcium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide into this base edition tank. And it would slowly drip into the system. I mean, there was a trickle of flow into the system, into a sump, which immediately pumped the water to 8,000 gallons of water. So there was no fluctuation in pH at all. Our pH was extremely stable. If it would go down, it would go down like 1/10 of a part per day. And then maybe 2 days later, we would add some more. So we had a base edition tank to keep the pH stable. pH was a big issue in the beginning because we didn't know where to put the base, because everywhere we put it, if you put it in the fish tank, you got a hot zone where you've got really high pH. The fish swims through that, it'll burn its gills. And if you put it in the hydroponic tank, there'll be a plug flow of high pH that'll hurt damage to roots. But because we had this base edition tank just trickling it's like dosing. It's like a dosing thing, but we didn't have an automatic doser. But it's slowly added to the system. So there is really, Charlie, don't you agree that we didn't really have much fluctuation in pH?
Because we maintained and we were always on top of it. I think what Steve's alluding to is more keeping it very stable over time. As you said, sometimes it could rapidly drop from 7 down to 5. So without that alkalinity buffer, I guess our systems can have that trend. I found the aquaponic system that we ran to be a little more stable than these nursery systems with drum filters. That was a sudden change. But I think that the KOH and the CaOH and the iron, what we put in our water over time, you guys, that's all we added. I was there 13 years. Jim was probably over 30, but we didn't go out and buy any other supplements. I think I once looked at potassium silicate for a 29,000 gallon system to bump it to, I forget what Steve had said. What's your recommendation? 5 ppm
for potassium?
For silica.
For silica, I prefer to keep my silica. What we found gives the best results for lettuce is above 60 ppms, and the reason is that it helps for all of the pathogenic reasons and increase in heat stress as well, reduces bolting, but it also increases crispness when it goes to shelf.
Yeah, so we grew the gamut of crops too, from lettuce to fruiting tomatoes and okras. We had some nutrient hogs in there for sure. So I think one reason I don't like the KOH is it's a hazardous chemical and it's hard to buy and ship.
Yeah, you can't put it on a plane.
Yeah,
for example.
To get past that and find a cheaper solution would be a great thing.
Well, Montana Grow makes a organic or OMRI certified potassium silicate, which you can ship internationally.
Also,
On a
sometimes
small scale.
sometimes magnesium is deficient, and that you can tell. And that results in leaves that are not, crispy, what you would say, or firm.
Turgid.
Turgid, or whatever. Yeah, strong leaf. Well, Wilson finds that, but Wilson again, he's always on the borderline because he's adding so little feed. And in our system, so he's got to add a lot more supplements. And in our system, we have a surplus of nutrients, and because we're doing a lot of fish, so we can afford to discharge nutrients. And but we produce a lot of fish. We produce, our system can produce like one UVI commercial scale system can produce about 10,000, 11,000 pounds of fish annually.
Yeah,
that's a significant amount of fish. But let me tell you something that I'm finding out with my consulting business here, is that everybody focuses on the aquaponic system, but there's ancillary systems that are needed. You need a bunch of ancillary systems. You need a quarantine system for when you get in, you buy fingerlings, or sex reverse fingerlings, and they have to be quarantined for a couple of weeks. That has to be a recirculating system. You don't want to stock a 1 gram fingerling in your grow out system. You want to have a fingerling rearing system that's producing a steady stream of advanced fingerlings that range in size from, well, let's just say an average of 50 grams. We usually chose 50 grams as our starting size, and then it would be 24 weeks to produce either a 500 gram fish or an 800 gram fish, depending on the stocking rate. And then the other thing about aquaponics is that when you harvest the fish, you can almost be assured that they're going to be off flavor because of all the dissolved organic matter in the water, and you've got to purge them. And so you've got to put them for about 4 days at least 4 days in clean water, and that has to be a recirculating system with a biofilter and solids removal, because if you're purging a lot of fish, solids will build up, even though you don't feed them the day before. So you've got all these other systems. And then another thing is if you're going commercial and you're harvesting 5,000 pounds of fish every week, you might not have sales for those fish, so you need to have holding system, and where you will hold the fish and you feed them a maintenance diet, which is 0.5% of body weight per day, and then from those holding tanks, you put them into your purging tank as your sales, as you line up your sales. So it's more complex than just an aquaponic system just sitting by itself. There's a lot of things involved in it.
I had one other question on the note that Charlie had is what supplementation, if any, have you guys done with molybdenum? Hold on a second.
We never we never supplemented. A lot of times we never saw it in our water. Sometimes it came up zero.
Because I've noticed molybdenum, I've actually seen in a commercial system where the molybdenum, it was old enough where the plants had stripped it out, and it is large vegetable. It was a lettuce system, and they are running super high nitrogen levels, and the plants basically plowed through it all, and they were showing really strange deficiencies because the molybdenum uptake was, the lack of molybdenum was affecting their ability to process the nitrogen, and that's why I was curious.
Steve, I was telling everybody, I wanted to remind that we only supplemented with the calcium, potassium, and iron. So in the years I was there, and as far as I know, the years everybody was there, We never went out and bought Epsom salts to add magnesium. We didn't add molybdenum. Again, 29,000 gallon system, and we were trying to get farmers to adopt these systems, and remote locations where a lot of things aren't available. So I would agree. I think there were times when molybdenum was probably nothing. So maybe adding it would have enhanced the nutritional quality of the plant tissue, but we would have had to look at that data too. As Marty was talking about earlier, there's some research out there that's showing that on these very low nutrient strengths, we can get as good or better yields, and at times better nutrient quality as well.
You know, just because sometimes it came up zero, sometimes 0.0, doesn't mean it wasn't 0.04. You know, so there could have been a trace amounts that were sufficient. You know,
and what that showed was that the systems were so balanced in the input and the uptake of that element that we never registered much more than that. So it was in check.
You know, we never did actually. Well, we did one time. I did a side-by-side comparison, and we found hydroponics to be the same as the aquaponics. And this was with a deep water culture system. You know, but when you run a system for years, we didn't change the water for years. We didn't. Maybe we weren't getting as like 100% growth that someplace else can get, but we were getting good growth and producing a good marketable crop. We did one experiment where we wanted to, in the early days, prove the sustainability of the system. So we produced lettuce for 3 straight years. We had 150, like about 150 lettuce harvests, and it was still pumping out lettuce. We would get dips in the summertime when it got really, really hot, and we had pythium problems, and that, which compounded things. You had a little bit of dip, and then when the cold temperature came, you look at. I graphed this. We had a bar graph of this 150 harvests. We only lost seven harvests, I think, due to a hurricane that came through. So,
Bravo! 3 years, aquaponic systems, recycling 98% of the water, and buying no fertilizer, and getting 27 cases of lettuce a week. That's amazing.
Although we could have gotten more than that, we didn't have the ideal temperature. That was one thing we suffered with. It was a little warm, definitely in the summertime.
And then as we were all,
that's a great question. So a lot of people live in warmer climates. What varieties of lettuce work great in the tropics?
If you go to Johnny Seeds, you can look up heat. They have a category of heat tolerant lettuces. And the other thing that you should consider is shade cloths in the middle of the day. We never had shade cloth, but it can get blazingly hot, especially where I live in Thailand. And so from about 10 a.m. in the morning till maybe 3 in the afternoon, you should probably shade them. That's one technique that you'll probably. I think if we had shade cloth, I think we wouldn't have had the wilting in the middle of the day in those hot summer days.
No, I was in Texas a couple years ago. I spent a little over a year running farm in Texas, and we were using 70 and 80% shade cloth on our hoop houses during the summertime. Yep. We switched mostly to basil at that time. Basil was thriving in that heat, but we had to shade it that much. I just put a 50% shade cloth on top of my greenhouse yesterday here in Santa Fe.
It makes a world of difference. It does. It makes a world of difference.
But that slows down their growth, doesn't it?
I can tell
we get too much sun in Santa Fe, so we have to block some of the sun.
No. Ken has had really good luck with, say, taking something like that and with basil or rosemary or oregano, and you take it and you can, you see your aquaponic farmer, you can take it, blend it with some really high grade salt, and make an herb salt or an herb butter. Not Ken, there's another aquaponic farm I'm working with previously that makes an herbed butter out of their stuff, and they take butter, melt it down with the herbs that grow on their farm, and then resell that. So a little bit of value added can go a long way as well.
Yeah,
there's a lot of value added stuff that you can do with these systems. The big one that I always talk about is the the Miles Harston and what's that called? That operation called in Flanagan, Illinois. I don't even know if it's still there.
That was Aqua Ranch.
Oh yeah, Aqua Ranch. Well, his wife made a basil vinaigrette. Well, they were selling the big leaves to Whole Foods in Chicago, and then the smaller misshapen leaves, they made a basil vinaigrette out of it. And then what he did with the carcasses of the fish, he sold fillets, but he made the fish emulsion out of the carcasses. You know, that's fish emulsion that they use to fertilize house plants. You can buy it at the store, that sells decorative plants. Anyway, they were getting 100. They didn't bottle the fish emulsion. They just produced it, and they were getting $200 a barrel for fish emulsion. So there's tons of value-added things that you can do.
I had a pretty big farm that was putting all their roots and shoots into barrels, and then the pig guy would come pick it up for $1.25 a pound. It's a little bit of money, but he was getting 50-pound barrels every once in a while and turning that back into money.
So on that note, what are some of the more peculiar or different or strange or maybe less orthodox aquaponic programs that you guys have been involved with?
Oh man, my memory is failing me. I'm getting up.
Yeah, he's just being careful with his tongue right now.
Let's see. Well, one thing that doesn't work is aeroponics. Aeroponics works in hydroponics, but the solids will clog the emitters, those sprays. And I wouldn't recommend aquaponics for aeroponics. I'm running out of energy here.
Well, I think there's
no worries.
I think there's ways around the aeroponics. My friend Pedro, actually your student also. Do you remember Pedro Casas in Puerto Rico, Jim?
Vaguely.
They had Agroponicos was one of our success stories there just south of San Juan. And he adopted some A-frames all the way down one of his UVI troughs. And at the top, he used an aeroponic kind of misting system. And it was every day they'd have to go by and walk through and hit all 18 A-frames or however many it was and clean it out. But the systems grew mint and watercress, and he had some basil plants in there and pak choys, the little pak choy plants. And that vertical really increased the spacing on one of our troughs.
Something, when anybody comes to me with crazy ideas, well, sometimes I have to sign a confidentiality statement. I can't tell you one of the craziest ideas because I signed the confidentiality statement. They never did it.
Of course.
When they come to me with crazy ideas, I try to quickly talk them out of it, and most of the time I refer them to taking an aquaponics course. And now, my business partner Wilson Leonard just came out with probably the best book on aquaponics. I'm sure it's the best book on aquaponics. It's a 400-page book called Commercial Aquaponics System. So if anybody hasn't bought it, you can go to his website and buy it. His website is Aquaponic Solution. Anyway, read his book because you'll learn all. He's a very articulate person. You'll learn all. You get the update on everything except probably he doesn't know some of the things you've done, Stephen. I don't know if he's got lactobacillus in there or not.
Jim, I also get people come up with the most crazy ideas. Aquaponics is already fascinating and crazy, and I usually tell people that you're on your own. You're coming up with a new design that nobody's proven, nobody's run, and it's not cookie cutter like hydroponics is. I can go to Crop King and get a Dutch bucket tomato system and a manual on how to run the whole thing, and it kind of works. But aquaponics is a lot more. We say lazy man's hydroponics, but as Jim's saying, there's a lot of other complexities with fingerling rearing and supply that hydroponic growers don't have.
Yeah, no, that is actually one of the drawbacks of aquaponics, because you got to coordinate your. I mean, it's easy to produce transplants. It takes, from seeding, it's like 3 weeks to get transplants to put in your system. But when you deal with the fish, there's a lot more complexity, and you've got to set up an assembly line kind of system that every single week you're gonna like harvest the fish tank. You're gonna take fingerlings and stock that tank. The way we had it in the Virgin Islands, we had a good professional team, 4 professionals, and we had it like clockwork. When we harvested the lettuce at 6 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, by 8 o'clock the lettuce was harvested. By noon all the transplants were in, and then by the next day the roots were already going through the net pots. We harvested the fish early in the morning, and by noon the next batch of fingerlings were stocked in there, and by that evening they were feeding. And we did this for years and years and years and years, which actually kind of blew my mind that we did as well as we did.
We have a question from Joe Pate, which I know Charlie knows. He says, hey guys, just want to say great show so far. Just wondering how your thoughts are on pre-dosing culture water with enough K and calcium to meet nutrient levels, and then bringing the pH down with phosphoric acid. And then I guess on that question, let me add to that. What do you guys consider to be the limit for phosphorus in aquaponics?
Ah.
I don't know. We always just got enough, so I don't know. I don't know what the limits are. There's a ratio. There's a ratio that it has to be. Charlie, I think there's a ratio between phosphorus and something else that you need to maintain.
So
Yeah.
I've found personally, I found that calcium to phosphorus ratio, you want a 3 to 1,
Okay.
and then you want a calcium to magnesium ratio of 2 to 1. In general, now there's some things are different. Lettuce would be a little bit less than that, but in general, if you stick to that, your crops are going to do great in aquaponics, and that's just speaking kind of vaguely. You know what I mean?
We kind of our approach is we dealt with whatever the system gave us, basically.
Sure.
Our system was designed for a farmer that would just throw fish to feed in, stock it. If you followed our guidelines, stock at the rate we say, build this, actually duplicate the UVI system, duplicate your stocking rate or planting rate, and as long as you can keep electricity going and there's no disruptions there, and hurricanes or storms or whatever, it just works. It's farmer friendly, and you don't need to be a scientist. You didn't need to be a scientist to run the system. You did have to have some basic understanding of what was going on, but just follow the guidelines. And let's see, I was going to say something. Somebody else say something.
Yeah. Well, I think, what was the first part of that question from Joe?
Oh, yeah, that question.
So it says, what are your thoughts on pre-dosing culture water with enough calcium and potassium to meet nutrient levels, and then bringing the pH down with phosphoric acid?
No,
prior to stocking. That way you aren't playing catch up with adding a little every day, and then you aren't limited with your additions by pH.
We never add phosphate, though. We never add phosphorus to the system. Is he saying phosphorus?
Yeah, he's saying using phosphoric acid to bring the pH down to add phosphorus to balance the K.
Well, no, we never did any of that stuff. What we did is we would start the system and we would feed very minimally in the beginning, and so that until it takes about a month for the biofilters to become established, and then after they're established, we would start stocking. We would stagger the plant production, so we would only plant 1/4 of the system every week, and so it'd be an additional 4 weeks before it was at full production. And by that time, you were feeding at a pretty good rate. Let me tell you what I'm recommending to people now that want to go commercial. We have, and this is just, I haven't tested this out or anything, but this is just a management practice. If you stock the fish, it's one of the disadvantages of aquaponics. If you have 4 fish tanks and you want to stagger, it's 18 weeks before you can get up to full production. So the first week, at time 0, you're going to stock one of those tanks. And since you have like 29,000 gallons and you've got a tank full of small fingerlings, you've got a big dilution factor. So you can feed pretty much what those fingerlings want to eat. Although we recommend for the first month until the biofilter is established that you measure ammonia and nitrite every day, and nitrate occasionally. And when you see the ammonia and the nitrite go down and nitrate go up, then you know your biofilter is established. Well, at the end of that 6 weeks, then you start your next batch of fish, so you're going to be at half capacity. That's when I would recommend putting in your first crop of plants after 6 weeks. Your first crop of plants, which would constitute 25% of the system. So that's just kind of a rule of thumb. I don't know if that's absolutely optimal or whatever, but and we don't work on any pre-establishment. I think what you're talking about is small systems where you've got just really small system and you want to get going fast, but we never did that.
But I think that what Joe is saying is very wise to jumpstart your system. You know, Joe, if you're trying to get a quick establishment, maybe for cash flow, maybe you could run the troughs almost like hydro for a little bit, and then bring some of that nutrient in. That, and he's also saying if we add the, I think what he's saying is if we add the potassium and the calcium, maybe in advance. Were those the two nutrients, Steve? At the beginning?
I think that, in my opinion, the best way to do that, if that was your goal, and so you had a brand new system and you needed to boost the numbers and you wanted to do this, and say and this is also, same would apply if you didn't want to do it for that reason, but say you have a starting pH of 8.2, 8.4, you can actually just take a bunch of dry ice. It's dirt cheap. You can get it pretty much anywhere on the planet, just about. And take your dry ice blocks, drop it in your aquaponic system before you actually throw any fish or bacteria or plants in the system. It'll crash the pH through carbonic acid, and then you could actually buffer it back up with your calcium and potassium, bringing it back to the proper pH level without any need to actually use the phosphoric acid.
That's a very, very good idea. Because when we started, a lot of times we started and the pH was 8, and so for the first several weeks we couldn't add any of our supplements, and because the pH was already too high, and our plants would suffer. So that's a very good idea. Yeah, did we have dry ice in the Virgin Islands? I don't know if we even had dry ice in the Virgin Islands.
I think you do, because they ship stuff in it all the time. So there's probably some.
I got turned on to that dry ice pH down method by a bunch of koi guys that build koi ponds, and it was one of the cheapest ways for us. When we'd have a koi pond, I'd fill it up for the first time, and because of the sand or the rock or the tap water, it's in the 8s or somewhere in the 8 pH range. And the koi, these expensive koi, I got 60 grand worth of koi sitting in my truck. I can't put them in a pH that's a whole point different. I'll kill them. So I could use the dry ice. I could run to the store, drop that in there, throw it in there, wait about 2 hours. It would all boil off. It would level out the pH in there, and then I could buffer it back up. And then, by the end of the day, I could actually put the fish in and bring them adjust the pH pretty freaking close. And that, allowed me to do things much faster rather than waiting 2 or 3 days to actually get these fish in.
Yeah, that's a good idea. One thing is, as long as we're talking about nutrients, you shouldn't, if you use a media system, you shouldn't use limestone as your media, because you'll get too high of calcium levels in your system. A lot of island situations where the only gravel is from they find on the seashore and stuff like that. That's all calcium carbonate, and if your media is all calcium carbonate, you get really high calcium levels.
Yeah, cool. By the way, Jim Rakocy, Joe Pate is a graduate student at Kentucky State under Jim Tidwell and Janelle Hager.
Yep, and he's actually one of the gentlemen that helped do that research project on and paper on the lactobacillus increasing fish growth by 15%.
Oh, okay.
He also did some research with aquaponics and hemp as a crop at Kentucky State.
Yep.
So big ups to Joe.
Is there any value to hemp though? I just had an inquiry today about hemp. Is there any value to that? Or is that, it grows slow and it's not like cannabis or anything like that.
For hemp, unless you're going to do something really large scale, it doesn't make sense, because hemp, it grows. You can grow it in a field, and it's kind of like growing wheat or beans. It just doesn't, or corn. It doesn't quite make sense in aquaponics. But you will get increased production of certain cannabinoids and terpenes.
But aren't there some high CBD hemp plants that you grow as short plants full of oil seeds?
Yep, yep, and that's the reason why when you can grow acres and acres and acres of something, even if it's much lower potency,
Right.
your production is so much higher that it kind of swamps the need to do it on a smaller, like even in a greenhouse setting. You know, for medical cannabis it makes sense, but for field hemp it doesn't, unless you're doing it for clones or something for even production. It doesn't quite make sense.
Okay. Jim, I agree with Steve. Kind of, I'm tapping into you. Have you heard any new things, and are you involved in any new projects?
Last July I was in South Africa at Stellenbosch University giving a short course and a workshop, a 2-day workshop, and there was a man there from Pretoria that had a total paradigm shift of an aquaponic system, and he's the guru now in South Africa. Let's see, I can't think of he's got a special Kleinshire system or something like that, calls it. And what he did is he's actually got 600 square, no, he's got, yeah, I think it's 500 square meters of plant growing area. And you can buy a canvas material that's waterproof in South Africa. So he has these cells that are 14 meters by, is it 6 or 8 meters wide? And anyway, he's got a huge plant growing area for one system. And what he did, and I think he's going to run into trouble with that, is he made a D-ended raceway. I don't know if you know what a D-ended raceway is. It's
Yeah, I
along
do.
the D ends, or the ends are rounded, and you put a baffle in the middle. And he put 14 cages in there that are about 6 cubic meters per cage and stocked 1,000 fish per cage. And every week he draws the fish out of one of the cages and stocks it again. And he has a like a 42-week grow out or something like that. And okay, so this is a real paradigm shift because he's producing like something like 20,000 pounds of fish in this tank, but he didn't do it yet. He was just starting it up. And I told him, well, one of the big problems he's going to have is getting the solids out of a D-ended raceway tank. And he had some kind of a program that he looked at where the deposits would be made if you had a certain flow rate going around, and he put 4 drain lines in, 4 drain lines. I still don't think that's going to do it because it's just not going to be that neat. It's not going to there's no cone bottom or anything. He's going to get some of it out. And the other thing is those cages occupied every square inch of the tank, and so the fish are not free to roam around the tank at all. And and then he has, so I think he's going to run into trouble with that. And that was quite an original. But here's another amazing thing that he did, and that is he can have temperatures as low as like 0 in between. Well, I'm talking about centigrade. Now that I live in the rest of the world, we deal in centigrade. He can have temperatures going from 0 to 40 degrees centigrade, and like 40 degrees centigrade is like over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and 0 degrees centigrade is 32. And he went in before he built this system. He's building 4 of these systems, and before he did that, he buried this what do you call this that they put in greenhouse floors, the hydroton. Was it
Hydroton?
Yeah, hydroton. Those heat lines. Not that. No. What is it when you put those pipes in the floor to keep your greenhouse hot?
Subterranean heating and cooling, underground.
Radiant floor heater.
Radiant flooring.
Well, but there's another name for the actual pipe. Anyway.
Gassed.
PEX pipe.
Okay, but he went to work and he had a backhoe, and he dug trenches all around his facility that were, I believe they were 3 meters deep. That's like about 9 feet deep, and he got at that depth. The temperature remains constant year round, and by using heat exchangers, even though he had this incredible fluctuation in atmospheric temperatures, by using heat exchangers, he was able to maintain his water temperature at 22.7 degrees centigrade, which is roughly what, about 70 degrees or something like that. Fahrenheit.
That's right.
So he used geothermal heat, but he didn't have a he just went very deep into the ground where the temperature, it doesn't fluctuate, even though you could be freezing outside or over 100 degrees and boiling. And he used that temperature to keep his water temperature at a constant temperature year round. I think he had some really good success with the plants. I mean, I saw some of the plants in there, but he was just starting up, and I think he's going to run into trouble with solids, getting the solids out of the fish tank.
Well, Jim, I've seen systems, not quite the D tanks, and I'm sure everybody can look it up, but it takes a rectangular tank and you put a baffle down the middle and you curve up the corners and you move the water in, so it gets a circular motion out of a rectangular tank. I've seen some cages stacked in there. If those guys could loose some fish and have some fish on the outside of the cages swimming up and down and grazing the walls, that would help for sure.
I think so too, because his cages were flush to the bottom, and they were right adjacent to each other. And he had. Oh, here's another thing he had. He had his inflowing water. He had an inflow line under each cage with fresh water coming up. It wasn't like going in at one end, and then by the time it got around, there was really bad water quality. All the influent water was coming up at 14 separate points, right under each cage. It was, and he did this all very, very cheap. He had these wire meshes for the, wire mesh with the liner.
Yep, absolutely.
And he had these big, strange canvas tanks that for the plants. 500 square meters. I mean, 500 square meters. Over 5,000 square feet of plant growing area, and one fish tank. And it's staggered, and it's in cages. It's easy to harvest. It was, I consider it a paradigm shift, but I think he'll run into some problems. But I think that's something that should be pursued here too. You should look at that.
Oh, you're saying this is a system that's just coming online?
Yeah, he's going to do 4 of these, and the slides he showed me where we shared a lot of information after the conference, and he sent me some slides, but I don't think he was up to capacity yet, and so I don't think he was brand new to fish culture, so he did his homework, but I don't think he realizes what the practical aspects he's going to run into.
Yep.
But he's already teaching. He's already teaching right away. I just saw pictures recently. He's teaching already. Nobody in South Africa cared about what I had to say. They're all interested in what he was doing.
Yeah, you guys, that's something that if anybody's still listening, that I saw a presentation recently. As I was listening earlier, Dr. Rakosi mentioned Dr. Merle Jensen. And so I watched a video. He's a great speaker, man. What a great entertainer. So if you go on YouTube and look up Merle Jensen, if anybody doesn't know, if you go on YouTube and look up the CEAC, Controlled Environment Agriculture Center at University of Arizona, there's a wealth of resources of videos and all kinds of topics in that field of CEA. But Merle Jensen was talking about consulting. And some of us try to consult. Some of us don't know anything about consulting yet, but maybe you should. But he talked about his history, and I want to honor having Jim Rakosi, and thanks Steve for putting it together, because these guys have made a history. He has a whole line of experience to learn from and to teach people from all the mistakes as well as the good stuff. And so Merle was stressing that. So it's really hard for people young without experience to be representing our industry as a consultant. So beware. I don't think many of your listeners are using consultants. Most of your listeners are tinkers, are going to do it themselves. And that's what Jim and I taught for the whole time I was with him. I still teach that. I taught a class recently with Steve. We inspire you to build your own system. We teach you the principles, and we can help with some design work. But really, you're on your own, like I was saying earlier, and improve us, do a good system and show it off and boast. So I look forward to that. But thanks again, Jim, for being here and sharing with us.
Well, yeah, well, you've rejuvenated me here. I haven't been talking aquaponics very much lately.
It was great to listen to you talk tonight. I mean, to hear you come from the very beginning of where you started out in your travels, fantastic. I hope you come back again.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
I'll come back next year because I have a condo in Florida, so I come once a year in April. So I'll be here this year.
Sounds good. We'll do this again in a year.
Okay.
And now, if people want to find out more about what you do, how would they find out? Is there a place you can direct them, a website, or a place they can find out more?
Our website is called the Aquaponics Doctors. And that's
Wonderful.
That's Wilson Leonard and me.
Wonderful. That's awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll make sure I get that in the description of the video so that people can just click the link and get right to you.
Okay. Thanks.
And we really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
That was awesome.
All right. No problem. No problem.
Thank you so much.
And you didn't run out of memory, or your dad?
No, I didn't run out of my.
Yeah.
If I go offline, I'll see if I got any more data on my.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay. Well, nice talking to y'all. Good luck.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, and like we always say, you guys, if your system's in balance and you've taken care of what you're supposed to take care of, you should be able to sleep well tonight. So I hope everybody sleeps well.
Yep.
All right then.
Thank you. Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Peace, Dave.
All right.
How awesome.
That was really cool. Dr. Faust, if you're still there, you had something to mention on the shrimp there, and then I actually had 2 questions for you if you're still there from we had in chat. Okay, you might have he's still on mute, so if he's not there. If not, we'll see if he comes back. How are you guys doing, Hogmaster and Roger? What's new with you guys? What's new with you, Hogmaster?
Just trying to sell everything and get moved, buddy. Doing this across several state lines, moving is going to be an adventure for sure. But I got a lot of crap and don't need half of it, so I'm either going to pitch it or sell it and start fresh. It's going to be awesome.
There you back now?
Yeah. Yeah, I was out in my swim spa while I was listening. So I was
cool.
doing swimming.
I'm jealous.
That's awesome. So you had something to chime in about the shrimp?
Well, yeah, that's work we've been doing in Ecuador for years. It's not on the scale it should be because it's just hard to get people to adopt these things. But we had some innovators in shrimp production in Ecuador, and they got into using our Ion 14 product, which is what I developed in Hawaii because of the silicic acid and activated humic substances, limiting factors in soils, etc. And we were selling that product in Ecuador because it's volcanic soils like Hawaii, Ecuador, and there's that specific limiting factors in the soil. Then our customer, who's sort of a broker, just dealer down there, he had some customers that wanted a silica source for shrimp. These are outside shrimp ponds that their system down there is like dirt ponds, you might say. But anyway, so they started using our Ion 14, just throwing it in the water. And the problem in shrimp is this white spot disease and other diseases and things like that under high density. And with the humic, of course, it darkens the water, which helps protect against UVB, especially at that altitude. This wasn't necessarily that high altitude, but but it protects, it gives a degree of disease resistance, not just because it colors the water, darkens the water, but because of the polyphenols, carboxylics that activate resistance pathways. And but in general, it's just like chickens or what we're doing with chickens is probably a better example than cows, but just in general, better feed conversion, faster growth, more vigor. So humic substances, I mean, at least the functional group part, that's really doing the job there is just as crucial, maybe more crucial in aquaculture. But it follows a general rule of thumb from pretty most all animals, provides like in pigs, it's 14% increased feed conversion, and chickens about the same, a little less, and dairy cattle. So it doesn't really matter. But yeah, that's our experience in Ecuador. And then we had people using it on crayfish in Louisiana in big operations, where they put it on rice first and then and use our TM7 or the IM14, then they'd flood the patty and then do the crawdad culture. So the state shut them down because our product's not approved. Not approved, right? And the problem is with humic substances in the U.S. and why we sell it in Europe and South America, because in the U.S. the FDA doesn't approve it as a feed ingredient. See, and they've been holding back for years, preventing it from being utilized because it effectively replaces antibiotics and hormones in livestock feed. And in Holland and Europe, no, that they don't consider that's what they're looking for, something that can replace antibiotics and hormones. So that's what holds it back in the U.S. There's nothing to stop people from using it. We just can't label it as aquaculture additive or chicken feed supplement. So that's what we're up against.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware about that regulatory problem.
Yeah, oh yeah. Our organization, the Humic Product Trade Association, they hired a lobbyist in D.C. that was FDA employee, PhD, and try to push the thing through. They won't even accept a grass petition. That's what they call generally regarded as safe, and that's the minimum, to use it. And they won't even accept the petition. Whereas in Europe, it's approved as a veterinary supplement. There's no restrictions. And in Oregon, it's a veterinary remedy. But the rest of the U.S., no. You can use it. They're not going to stop you. You can't promote it. You can't label it. We sell it to some of our other products to hog producers in Iowa. They just learn that it works and they use it. But so that's the situation there. But it has huge potential in aquaculture. Absolutely. I just how can I do the
Yeah, definitely an issue for U.S. producers. We had another question. This is Dr. Faust. What are the differences between chemical extracted kelp extract and cold pressed kelp extract?
If they're just using hydrolysis, they're using basically a hydroxide to solubilize the kelp. That's really been used for a long time. Norwegian kelp and so forth. Similar to how you solubilize humic substances, where you knock the pH down to about 11, and it's like how you make soap too. It's a saponification reaction. So it's not much different than what you do with soap, where you take the fat and insoluble stuff and you turn it into something that's soluble by saponification of the fat into like an emulsion. Right? Whereas, yeah, you could do, see, because but I don't know, in terms of getting all the goodies. I'm not sure about cold pressed, but there were some good products on the market. You get the cytokinins that way. Now, whether you're getting minerals, kelp is a good source of a whole range of minerals and humic substances. You test kelp products, you'll find humic substances because, you know, they're sea plants, and sea is a good source. All the humic acids landed up in the sea. And so, you know, kelp takes it up. So you have a certain amount of that in there. So it's just whatever's practical. I mean, whatever works. Most of the kelp on the market is going to be your you're using hydroxide solubilization. But I remember the one in Maine, I forget who. But yeah, that was the deal on that. Yeah. That was nearly always a liquid product. Yeah, I used to buy it from a guy up in Waldport, Maine. I forget the name. But it was a cold pressed. It was a liquid. But it was very unstable. You know, you put it in your warehouse and the 5-gallon pails would swell up and roll over, you know, from off gassing. So, you know, it was a good product, but it just didn't have any shelf life. And we get the nice dry maxi crop kelp from Norway, and it's, you know, you can keep that for years. Make a solution when you need it and use it right away. Because this stuff is very susceptible to microbial decomposition, big time. So you make up a kelp solution, you got to use it at least, you know, no longer than a week. You know, so that's the advantage of the soluble powder. But you know, the technique is to basically solubilize it with potassium hydroxide.
Yet another question is, what about grape pomace? Pressing remains as a source for humic acid. I use horsetail extract product and got enriched with that, and I wondered what the about the quality.
Well, you know, I mean, humic substances take a long time to actually, you know, form, and you can get it from like vermicomposting. You know, given enough time. I mean, yeah, if you took grape pumice and you composted it or use it as a vermicompost, of course, you know, you get a lot of tannins out of grape. Matter of fact, I was thinking about making a product with that because there's so much of it around you. But so yeah, it has some useful properties for sure. But it's just like anything. I mean, it's economics. You're handling a lot of bulky material. It takes time, takes space, energy. You know, so everything turns out to be like, hey, what's the most economical? Most. That's what you're looking for.
We had another question. It says, Joe Pate asks, are fulvic and humic acids considered tannins? And then do you know what organic compounds the tannins would mostly consist of in an aquaponic system if you're using humics or fulvics? Since you have experience with the shrimp and stuff, I figured it'd be similar.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, basically, humic substances is a big range of high molecular weight to low molecular weight. So the high molecular weight is black, and that's methylene groups and things that are related to coal and oil. Okay, and then it grades down to you know, brown. And so you have the humic, fulvic, olmic. These are all fractions of humus or humic acids with an S. So there's a whole range of fractions there. See, they go from useless and even toxic to bioactive. And the bioactive ones are low molecular weight, so they're more like brown. And then the fulvic acid is gold or yellowish gold color. Okay, so they all have a different chemical profile. you know, like the fulvic fraction is high in oxygen, and it's high in aromaticity, and that's organic chemistry talk. But that's where most of the bioactivity is in the low molecular weight, because high molecular weight cells can't utilize it. I mean, it can't be absorbed. It's too high molecular weight. That's what plugs up the roots. But the tannins, I mean, you know, I mean, that's the tan color you see in mountain streams, not just mountain streams. These tropical rivers, that they would be clear if it weren't for humic substances, and so now they're really, really golden, yellowish color, and that's leached from the rainforest into the streams, you know, from the breakdown of lignin, and that's where you get your tannins, you know, like how they extract tannins from bark. So it has to be the right kind of organic matter to yield tannins, and then they're modified by, you know, decomposition. There's 5 different tannins. Okay. So this is what you see, what gives the color to water, and I believe is the real difference in terms of productivity of that water, that drainage, or that river system makes a huge difference. That's what I was telling you about Dr. Steinberg's work in the Rio Negro. And the Rio Negro is negro because it's the humic substance coming out of it. And so he's a freshwater ecologist. So he studied the relationship to, you know, all this stuff to, you know, fish. And of course, you can't separate these kind of things from the natural ecosystem. So they're there. And like the Okefenokee Swamp, for instance, is the source, great source. But yeah, that's the color you see in the water, is the tannins. And it's strictly from the low molecular weight side of the humic substances. The black stuff is sludge on the bottom, or, you know, may have a black color. So yeah, it's a kind of complex thing.
Well, let me jump in here because Steve jumped out of his seat.
Sorry about that. I was just refilling my glass here. What are the 5 different tannins?
The 5 different tannins? You don't want me to go into that. It's too late at night for me to get into biochemistry.
Okay, I was just gonna say it's definitely a rabbit hole. I'd love to hear you go down someday.
Yeah, well, that really is a rabbit hole. I mean, that's one that we're going down now. I'd have to pull out my book on humic substances, Dr. Tan, to give you that one. Yeah, he's like the guy that's written the books, and that you can get the arcane chemistry that you can't remember. You got to go to that.
And what was his name again? I'm sorry.
See, what's his first name? Matter of fact, I did a video, or an audio recording of an interview I did with him. I had a little talk show podcast years ago when I was in Hawaii. But he's written a couple books on the subject. I got all his books. But he was a professor at, I think, Georgia Tech or University of Georgia. But if you look at the humic acid literature, you'll see a lot of references to Tan, Dr. Tan, T-A-N, Chinese or Malaysian or something. But he gets into the nitty gritty, and he's put together, well, it's kind of a source book on humic substances and the chemistry. You know, this is something that they discuss at these meetings I go to. There's time I fall asleep, you know, when all the chemists start really getting into arcane chemistry. It's sleepy time for me. You know, I'm looking for really the practical aspects of these things, you know, and moving into the
Uh, on that note, we had another question is, I know some organic acids have anti-nutritional factors in fish. Are there any anti-nutritional factors related to fulvic or humic acids that you're aware of? I know that you personally, I know that you spoke about how there's a bell curve on the humics and fulvics. I would imagine that would apply to other organisms aside from plants, yes?
And you have some types of humic substances that are absolutely negative. I mean, we've tested, for instance, some of these humic substances from China. And they're really based on pretty much a coal, really coal kind of a material, oxidized coal. They use it for drilling muds and things, but they were trying to sell it for, plant growth purposes. And that's the kind of stuff that actually reduced plant growth or reduced seed germination. But that's the stuff that has all these methylene groups, that's like in coal and oil and stuff like that. So there's definitely some negatives. There's a range of negative compounds. Can be. I mean, these things vary like gigantically, but the ones produced in nature, let's say, like in the forest or Okanofi swamp or something like that, it's a pretty balanced system. But again, it depends on what if it's humic substances made from saltwater sedge or pine, it can be negative. It can be toxic. If it's made from broadleaf trees, oaks, cypress, that kind of hardwood trees, euphorbiaes in the tropics, that's the kind of the good stuff. So it really is dependent on what the plants that, were the feed material that started it to begin with. In other words, rich hardwood trees and nitrogen fixing trees produce a rich humic substances, which produce a rich, watershed productivity. So it's all tied together. You go through something made out of coal in there. A lot of it is whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, like anything. Like if you make compost and it goes anaerobic on you, starts to smell, hydrogen sulfite and all that. Smells like rotten eggs because you let it go anaerobic, used up all the oxygen. Okay, so now it's producing stuff that if a plant root touches it, that root stops growing. That's it. And if you use it for mushroom production, forget it. It kills the mycelia. So the substances that are formed in decomposition under lack of air, with no oxygen or air, are bad news. So, these things have to form, in an environment, where there is oxygen and not because if they're forming aerobic, you get the high oxygen fulvic, which is, a very high oxygen fraction. And if it's deep, you get coal. You get, the methylene groups, the stinky hydrogen sulfides, toxic compounds. So it's pretty much organic matter can go one way or the other on you, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic. So that's the main key there. If that happens right, it's a good thing. But try the water that comes out of a coal mine. See how that goes for you. Check those streams out. There's not a living thing in the water. See? But it's all like humic substances. It's all derived from plants. One of them will kill the stream, the other one makes it rich. Yeah, because like I say, it's just got to be a pretty narrow range of to be, optimum results. So that's tea color. Tea, like iced tea color. And if it starts getting darker than that, so that's about it. I think everybody's seen those kind of streams. Well, maybe not. If you live in Kansas, you might. But I remember, being up in the mountains as a kid, and noting that where we really were getting some good trout fishing up in the Appalachian Mountains is where we had that tea-colored water. And I didn't know what the hell it was, you know. I just liked fishing, and there's a correlation there. But so that's about it. It's just nature, just nature. You don't have to do anything. But if you're going to do aquaculture or agriculture, then you better think about doing something. So, it can be compost, vermicompost, humic substances. But like I work with converting biomass with Pleurotus ostratus into a high protein fish feed. That was something that I did. And I worked out a mechanical method to do it in mass quantities. Because that was the big problem in aquaculture, was the cost of the feed, availability of feed. So it all, like I say, it all ties together. It's all fits together. Because those same fungi produce humic substances too. Because they can eat lignin, convert lignin. And lignin and cellulose is what's behind all this. Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah, no, that was great. I very much appreciate you coming back on the show again this week and joining us again.
Well, I enjoy talking about it. It's something I was doing. It brings back, like, yeah, oh, that's right. I was doing all these things. Oh yeah, I developed an aquaculture. I was feeding them mushroom digested biomass, and I was using a circular raceway system. Yeah. So it brings it all back. See, a lot of these things, we worked on, and it's a long story what ended up happening. My geothermal aquaculture project. I mean, that's a long story. I don't want to go into it. But it has to do with greedy rich guys and money and betrayal, things like that.
Oh, all the things that make up a good business story.
Yeah, right.
Or a book. Yeah.
All right, well, I think we'll wrap things up. We're running a little bit longer than usual already, so I really appreciate everyone for coming on the show, and I really, again, big thanks to Dr. Rakosi for joining us and all the work he's done to help us get to the point where we can even host this show. So I very much appreciate him and all of his work he's done, and as well as Charlie for chiming in and joining us, and Dr. Faust again for coming back, and again, any previous guest is always welcome on the show, and thanks a lot for coming back again and hanging out with us and sharing your knowledge as well. So thanks to everyone, and we'll be back again next week. And if you guys want, Dr. Faust, why don't you tell everyone how to find you if they want to reach you?
Well, I just got a notice today. I think we're about ready to go live on our new website. But it's and I'm going to put some of my stuff up there, like some of my presentations that I did years ago, on ancient Hawaiian agriculture for sustainability and other stuff. But it's bioag.com, which is BIOAG.com.
Oh yeah.
Bioag.com.
We talked
Awesome.
about that. Yeah, you said
The health products website is wujinsan.us. That's for the health product side and medicinal mushroom products.
Awesome. I'll make sure I get those added to the description as well, so people can just click and don't have to even navigate. And then what about you, Roger? How do people find you?
Well, you can find me at ilovegrowingmarijuana.com, and right here I'm nursing my little 2-year-old pit bull. She's in heat, so I'm having to keep her separate from my big old hound dog, and she's wore out. I've been sitting here nursing her all night. Yeah, I've been building a fence to be able to put up my my little experimental greenhouse so I can start some aquaponics out here. So we kind of decided today where we're going to place it finally. So that's because I've had 10 different ideas. It's one of those things. Well, one of the things is it's got to be in a proximity of the well that makes sense. um, like like a straight line, basically. So we finally, I decided I'm going to put it right next to the driveway, the main big driveway that's built up. I'm going to put it 5 feet off of that, and I'm just going to start with a 24 by 30. And I like what I think it was was it Charlie, or was it? I think it was Charlie tonight, talking about how people use greenhouses when they don't need them. And I thought that was interesting because when I first started, I kind of had a greenhouse thing, an area I built, and of course, I had all these plants started, So I just did. I built my system before I built my greenhouse. Then I built a small greenhouse. Well, actually, I had a small greenhouse, and I was in the. There's a transition from like a 12 by 16 to a 48 by 30. You know, I outfitted it with all the I did all the plumbing and got the reservoirs and all that, and then I started putting plants in there. In the first year, I really didn't have plastic a lot. When I started out, it was such nice weather. I just basically, and I followed the directions for outdoor hydroponics and all, where you increase your mix by 15%. The salinity of your mix by 15%. It's raining. You know, and that was again, that came from South Africa. Trials and farms, how they did it in South Africa. So I always felt like it's hotter there and there's bigger bugs and all around. But if they can do it there, you could do it here in America. And it's very inexpensive a lot of the ways they do it too. And I can see where you can add to aquaponics. Well, I'm just seeing so many ways that you could, I mean, I'm just seeing so many ways that things are meshing together, where I almost question some, like I love it. It came up tonight. I've been questioning some of the systems and things I've been hearing people say they're doing aquaponically, whether it's really hydroponics or aquaponics. So I thought it was great when Dr. James brought that up tonight, that a lot of people are doing things and they're kind of not really aquaponics. But I think that's where we're at. It's just like the dual root zone. Well, there you go. There's another argument. Well, soil is an aquaponics. So, I mean, I mean, I see what you got, but, you can make an argument that it's not pure aquaponics. I mean, just like, so you're using hydroponic methods for aquaponics, right? I mean, the system kind of started with that, wouldn't you say? I mean, I didn't mean to draw this out long either. It's just, wow, it just came out of my head, all of a sudden. But
well, no, so you're just by having a dual root zone, you're getting the benefits of those microbes. Right. That's all. Yeah. But aquaponics by definition doesn't have to be soilless. For example, wicking beds, how you go root crops, onions, potatoes, carrots. You have to have some kind of soil medium, be it coco coir or soil. It doesn't one or the other to get them to grow proper. So.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Well, anyway, yeah, I'll let you get going too, because I got this puppy's they're all probably hungry because of the show. Amy had to haul ass and go do some work tonight. She's kind of on call.
I did want to tell everyone, if you're in Colorado, I will be at the Dude Grows Cup on Saturday. So I will see you guys there. I did see a couple people in chat who will be there. I'm super stoked to meet y'all. Yeah, if you're in Colorado, definitely check it out, dudegrows.com/DGC Cup. And you can email them and they'll send you a link to get it's invite only because of the rules in Colorado. So you do have to get them to send you an invite link. But definitely come out, support the show. They're great guys. They also have a very awesome podcast twice a day at 4:20 a.m. and 4:20 p.m. called Dude Grows Show. Yeah, they'll be doing that. We have at ouroborosfarms.com. You can check out all the classes for the rest of the year. Me and Charlie and Ken will be teaching another class or two of the commercial class this year. I believe one is in May and the next one, I forget when the last one is for the year. And then we have some other classes coming up as well. Check out the schedule on there. And we're also working on a really cool event. I can't talk more on it until we get the date settled. But we have a really cool aquaponic / cannabis event coming up that's going to be a week long. And it's going to bring in some of the coolest people that you guys would ever want to learn from. and give you kind of a hardcore experience, and it'll be way different than anything you guys have ever done before. It's going to be really awesome, and I can't talk anything beyond just a little bit of a teaser because we're still nailing down specifics and dates and exactly who's going to show up. But definitely want to plant the seed. Definitely look at sometime in July or August. Keep your a week free for us, and I think you'll be happy you did. So, and that'll be out here in California. So
yeah, I can just imagine the lineup.
Stay tuned. Oh yeah, yeah. It puts a big smile on my face with the people that have already agreed, and we're trying to nail down everyone and dates. So you guys are gonna fucking love this. If you're a vegetable producer or cannabis producer, you're gonna really like it. And then if you guys are in the Bay Area for 420, I haven't 100% decided. I know there's a cool event going on in San Francisco. You can shoot me an email if you guys are around and want to get together, and we'll coordinate on that. You can shoot me an email at potentponics@gmail.com, and yeah, there's a big event up in San Fran. I think I might bop in and come hang out with some homies up there. If not, if you guys have a cool event going on, maybe we'll wander over there with a couple of goodies as well. So yeah, I think we'll wrap it up. Again, check out my YouTube channel, Potent Ponics. We have great info. I'm going to start putting out some more content. We'll have some DGC footage from the weekend. We'll have a bunch of cool videos, hanging out, chilling with everybody out there. I know tomorrow night is the Grow Tube thing. I'm going to hopefully be trying to hang out there. I don't know exactly what's going on. I think it's at the same place where the DGC Cup is. I heard some rumors. I don't know if that's true or not, though. We'll find out tomorrow. But yeah, definitely look forward to this weekend and hanging out with a bunch of our listeners and getting really high. So check it out, and I'll see you guys next week. Take care. Oh, almost forgot. I got a really cool announcement for next week. I can't believe I almost forgot. Big shout out to Mr. Green Jeans, who helped get this opportunity for the speaker for next week. Now, tentatively, he might have to change weeks last minute. We have Gypsy Nirvana on next week. Gypsy Nirvana, if you're a seed and a breeder, is a legend. Gypsy Nirvana has been fighting extradition from the UK by the US government for years, and he just won his case against extradition a couple days ago. And he's going to talk to us all about his breeding experience, his battle with the DEA, his battle with the US government, and the trials and tribulations of being a clandestine seed grower and selling your seeds across the planet by someone that is world renowned and one of the biggest names as far as the internet goes on that, and one of the biggest names as far as people that has fought the US government and won.
Yeah, because and what's so big about that is he won after Mark Emery spent several years in federal prison and was extradited from Canada. So the fact that he won and he's not getting put in prison in the United States is a pretty big precedent for the movement and medical marijuana. And hell yeah, that's going to be awesome.
Yep. So that'll be really cool. Tentatively, we'll have him on. We might have to reschedule. He's joining us from the UK, which will be very late his time. That's the reason why we've had problems getting Jorge Cervantes on, is because it's 3:30 in the morning in Spain. So we're trying to coordinate a time where he's not in Spain to get him on the show. I've been playing tag with him via email and just kind of waiting for him to have a time when he's in a reasonable time zone for us. So that is still happening. We have a couple of other cool guests that we got lined up. I'm not even going to rattle off a list right now, but we got a bunch of cool people. And yeah, so thanks a lot for everyone watching, and we'll see you guys next week. Sorry for babbling so long. Cheers.